Stop talking bad about Scott behind his back. Drug issues.
They can hear you. I will.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is 10 a.m. Welcome. Happy New Year. Still weird to say we're in 2023, but this is the first meeting for the Broker Responsibility Working Group of the new year. So we're excited to have everybody here. A lot of people in person. Got a few people online. We got a pretty packed agenda today, so we're going to get started very quickly. I did want to, before we get started, because it was a topic of discussion in our last meeting, that now that the election cycle is over, our rules have been brought back to the commission. So the rule on supervision and the rule on return of communication are supposedly going to be proposed in February, which means that at our next meeting, we will likely review public comment on those two rules. All right. And hopefully have adoption in May.
Good thing there's no hurry.
Right? Right? So we're there. We were supposed to have a very special guest in person, but if all of you woke up to the emails this morning that the FAA systems went down, our chair of the commission, Scott Kestner, was going to be here, but he was unable to make it on a flight this morning. So instead, we get him virtually. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning. There's nothing like getting up at 4 a.m. and going to the airport and calling your wife to come back and pick you up in 20 minutes. So, yeah, I am at the office. I'm going to see who shows up late as far as staff goes because they think I'm in Austin. So that might be a good thing. I did want to be there in person for a couple really quick reasons. Number one, to let you know the commission appreciates the work that the Broker Responsibility Group does. I think your input, and if you've seen the new Broker Responsibility class, it's certainly moving in the right direction. We appreciate you being focused on broker responsibility. We know a lot of things can't be fixed with a magic wand. Sometimes it's a step forward, a step back, but y'all are continuing to step forward. I do want to say the commissioners are engaged in broker responsibility. We had a case at the last commission meeting that we thought maybe the broker failed as far as some oversight on communications with the client and passing on what we thought was material information. And the broker, along with the agent, was sanctioned. There was a similar agreed order last week where the broker had policy and procedures that they would communicate material information. The agent ended up, getting sanctioned, and the broker did not. And again, I think that goes back to Bill Jones told me 20 years ago, as a broker, you're only responsible for unauthorized acts, for authorized acts. So if you have policy procedures and they follow policy procedures and you document that, you're going to be good as a broker. If you let them go against your policy procedures and you know it, then you're responsible. And so I think those two cases really show where the commission is trying to back y'all up as far as how important it is for broker responsibility. You mentioned the rules. There is nothing that hurts the commission more than having what we think is a good rule sent to us and we can't propose it. And I want you to know, any member of this broker responsibility group, if you have a question and you think we're delaying or slow walking or not moving it as forward as fast as we can, we welcome you to call, because there is nothing worse than coming up with a great idea and we can't move forward with it. And it'll be almost a calendar year by the time this gets done, just the way the rulemaking process works. And I want to be there in person, just to let you know that we do appreciate what you do. And we do appreciate the effort you put. And as a commission, we're gonna try to back everything we can that will help protect the consumer and move our agency forward. Sometimes our hands are tied. We had an unauthorized practice of law group yesterday, and we had really good discussion. And sometimes the best answer is no changes. Sometimes it's small changes. But I don't want you to think anything you do is not appreciated by the 9 commissioners, because it really is. If you listen to the commission meeting, you'll know they're all engaged. And I just wanted to say thank you for your work. I know y'all brought up transaction coordinators and expansion teams. We actually have a work group we put together that we're going to be looking into those. How can you be a transaction coordinator working for different brokers? How do expansion teams, affect broker responsibility? I think we put a really good work group together. I think we have 5 people on it, but we have probably 6 or 7 really good resource witnesses and testimonies that we're going to get. One from a large expansion team. Commissioner Hunter gave us some on some transaction coordinators. I reached out to a couple. So, stuff like that y'all bring forward, we're going to keep working on. You also had some questions on associate brokers, and we're going to let y'all solve that. And when y'all come up with something, don't think the commission will not take it to heart and work with y'all. I just want you to know that we have your back. We appreciate what you do. And if you ever think we're not paying attention, 915-588-2188, feel free to call me. As long as I know it's not a call for Medicare or back pain, I will answer. Be glad to answer any questions.
Hey, Scott, I work with members of NAR for putting together healthcare plans. Do you need to put a quote together?
It's funny.
At my age, I'm more interested in life insurance.
Any questions? Pastor? Thank you, Scott. We appreciate it.
All right, well, I'm gonna listen in.
Very good. All right, next up on our agenda is advisory committee training. I will turn over to Vanessa.
Look at that work. Y'all know, I gotta stand. Okay. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to do this. This is the launch of what I think will become a little bit of an annual training we did at the soft launch at the November workshop. We did a commissioner training, and I took some feedback from that training and tried to do something similar, though slightly different, for the TREC advisory committees. And that's just to, this group does not have new members at the moment, but some of our other groups, like ESAC has some new members, and inspectors will have some new members. So the thought is maybe we start doing this at the January meeting, just a little bit of a refresher on what advisory committees are, what the commission is, what they do. I've tried to tailor each one to the committee that I'm speaking to. And I'll get into a little bit. This group's actually a little bit different. And there's probably some changes headed this way for this group. Good changes. So first, just want to go over this, and this might seem real obvious, but stay with me. So the Texas Real Estate Commission. So TREC exists. This is part of our mission statement. TREC exists to safeguard the public interest and protect consumers of real estate services. And TREC does that through education, licensing, and enforcement. And they ensure, so this is, I'm going to just read this because I think it's important. They ensure the availability of qualified and ethical service providers, thereby facilitating economic growth and opportunity across Texas. So I always think of it as the agency's mission. They're tied a little bit, 2 pieces, right? You've got the consumer protection component, and through that consumer protection and making sure that the folks that the commission licenses are qualified and ethical, that's facilitating economic growth and opportunity across Texas. And I think everyone in this room knows that real estate's probably a pretty big deal as it relates to opportunity and economic growth in the state of Texas. So this is not a small thing for the state. We're a small agency, but our impact is big. Our license holder impact even bigger. Okay, next slide. So you all probably know this, and you can see the pictures and you can see real life. The commission consists of 9 members. Which are appointed by the governor. So we've got 6 broker members. And so broker members bring experience in the industries TREC regulates. So like real world experience. And in order to serve as a broker member on the commission, you have to have engaged as a licensed broker in your major occupation for the 5 years preceding appointment. That's a requirement. Also on the commission are 3 members who represent the public, and they bring that public consumer perspective to the commission. And it's interesting because I think the broker members do too, in a little bit of a different way, in that they work with clients, they work with different members of the regulated community, like the inspectors, things like that. But when you think about a public member, and we have these on some of our other groups, they are serving in the role of representing the consumer and the public interest component of the groups. And that way you don't have, it provides like a little bit of balance, right? They're like, well, and we, you know, we even have one, Rick Albers is on ESAC as a public member. And I think, gosh, he's really got to like, I mean, I made a joke about it and he pulled out a hat. Like he's got to really know which hat he's wearing in that meeting. And he does a great job because I think he's like, no, right now I'm serving as a public member. And so what does that mean? What is the design for me to bring forward? And so we've got that, in that we've got 3 members who represent that perspective, and they all come with different things. They come with that. Some have experience with other agencies, so they've got more interest in ensuring how the agency operates is aligned with how things are done. And so I think that's helpful for you to know. Okay, so that's the makeup of the commission, and to an extent, these advisory committees are kind of like miniature versions of that. And again, we'll walk through what it looks like for this group in just a second. So next slide. So again, driving force of the commission is consumer protection. All the policy-making decisions of the commission center on concepts of consumer protection and also that facilitation of economic growth and opportunity throughout the state. And that's why we say consumer protection all the time, right? Like you hear us say that all the time. So we'll look at that. Next slide is, so what are advisory committees, right? TREC has a lot of advisory committees and working groups, more than I think I've ever seen, which is cool. Because I think that means that TREC really does seek the input and recommendations from its license holders and from members of the public as it relates to a wide variety of topics, right? Because we've got an inspector advisory committee. We've got this group, which is a little bit different. We've got ESAC, right? So they're specific to the education standards and they have a set curriculum of what they look at. And then these committees, the ultimate job of this group and of all of our committees is to make recommendations to the full commission. And that includes recommendations related to rulemaking and other policies. You can actually go back just for a second. Sorry, I'm not as familiar with this one. I did the ESAC one day. Okay, so let's think about that. So this group gets together quarterly and you make recommendations, and they can be a wide variety. A lot of times they're rule-based, and I think that's pretty common with the advisory committees, right? Because TREC has that rule-making authority, and we vet those rules through the committees, you know, to make sure, like, does that make sense? Is that something that, you know, what would the industry, how would that be received? Is it solving a problem? Is it not solving a problem? What's the public side of that? So it's a real process. And so we gather this group together, and those conversations happen with the goal of making recommendations. This group has typically been, I think, more of like a legislative recommendations group in the past. I don't know that that's entirely true anymore. This group has changed a little bit. And I guess what I want to speak to is, so you guys get together, and then if you look around, there are other people in the room, right? So I'm here. Why am I here? It's to bring down the mood, right? No, I'm here to provide any insight, answer any legal questions you might have, sort of bring back the reminders of why we're here, what we've been directed to, right? I mean, how many times in this group have I said, barriers to entry? And there's a reason for that. It's because we have a directive from the governor's office. And so all occupational licensing agencies are beating that drum because we've been directed to. And so I'm here to do that. I'm here to answer questions. I'm here to let you know what hurdles there are, and we've talked about this before. You know, if the answer is like, yes, let's do it, like yes, there are no problems. I cannot see any pitfalls. Like, cool, let's do it. That's a super short conversation. The other conversations are like, you know, what's the example I gave the other day? If this group wanted to recommend, I think licenses should only be given to members of the BRWG. Like, I will immediately say, okay, let's pull back, let's look at statute, let's look at the goals of the agency and what we're doing, and let me advise you on what the potential issues are. And the reason for that is twofold. One, I want to help this group have productive conversations. I want you to be able to rely on me and ask me questions. I also never want to be in a scenario where Chance goes up and he gives his report and he's like, so we recommend only members of the BRWG hold licenses and no one else gets one. And the first time anyone hears from me is in that meeting when I turn on my mic and I'm like, okay, we need to talk about that. Or I do that in workshop and I say, here's the thing. Like, there's 17 laws that say we can't do that, and also, like, if we were to do that, it, you know, has this ripple effect, et cetera. And I want to build that trust with you guys, right? In turn, we also bring what I call subject matter experts to the table, and we actually meet in advance. So we have a couple of meetings in advance of these meetings to figure out, okay, who needs to be in this meeting. It's almost always Denise and Mike. And usually Jen. If it's ESAC, it's like 100% Jen. And so we want to have folks here who can speak to, I always think of it as like real world application, right? So I have this idea and I think it would be really great. And I do this. I'm like, Denise, I think we could just do this thing and it'd be awesome. And she's like, okay, that doesn't work for the following 16 reasons. And it's not because I don't think it's a great idea and I don't like it. It's because, like, there are system limitations and actually this would tie into this and we used to do it this way and the reason we stopped doing it this way. And so that I think is super helpful in generating the ideas. But ultimately, this group makes the recommendation. And so we're not here to, I always try to say, I'm not here to bring down the room. I'm just here to say, here are the challenges, here's what we're seeing, and how can I help you, right? But you can also, I mean, the group can also move forward with recommendations, knowing that there are hurdles and issues and things that have to, I mean, a lot of times it's like, well, there's a lot of stuff that's gonna have to be done before we could get to that full recommendation. That doesn't mean that recommendation can't happen. So that's why the room looks like it does. All right, next slide. Okay, so what about this group? So I have like a particular fondness for this group because this group was formed right when I started. And I remember being at your first meeting. I think I was actually in Dion's office because it was during COVID and we kind of had that like separation, and it was all virtual. But the BRWG has existed before, and it exists now. It has historically been a group dedicated to making recommendations related to broker responsibility issues in advance of legislative sessions. And I think when this group started in 2020, we were already a little late to that next session. We tried, but we, ultimately we looked at it and it's like, these are big recommendations. There's such a, legislative session is such a monster, like there's so many moving parts. And so we've kept going and we've got that ability to make the recommendations and to get things in place. And of topic for the next commission workshop is BRWG as a standing advisory committee. Is it going to remain? I think there's interest in that. I don't know because there hasn't been an official position on that, but I know that this is a discussion point. And to the extent that it's something the commission directs staff to move forward with, there'll be like a whole rule writing. We'll have, terms and what does that makeup look like? Like, who do you want on there? Are there, like, you look at ESAC, right? They've got license holder members, they've got education provider members, they've got, but like, what would that look like? So I think if I had to guess, this group is gonna undergo a little bit of a remodel and become a more fixed a fixed advisory committee. We treat it as an advisory committee for open meetings purposes, all that, but I think we're gonna start seeing a development of that, so stay tuned, I think that's cool. Next slide. Okay, so this is, I did not make this up, I joked about Rick Albers, who had an actual hat or on whatever day it was that we did this. The chair is the one who's brought this up to me, and I don't know if this is something that they hear in the associations, like if this is a discussion, but the question of like, which hat do you wear when you come to a meeting? So when you come to this meeting, what hat are you wearing? Like, are you, I'm gonna pick on Ty. Are you Ty Williams, dad of two, I think? You know, that person, accident prone.
Funny.
Or are you Ty Williams, business owner, and looking to see how you can make Trek work for you and like, I don't like this kind of, I don't like QYZ method of doing business and I'm gonna eliminate it because it doesn't work for me and every time I see it I think it's annoying. Or are you Ty Williams, volunteer, because you're all volunteers, so volunteer, here to roll up my sleeves and figure out what can I do to protect the consumer and facilitate that economic growth and provide recommendations to my licensing entity that I think will benefit the citizens of Texas. Which do you choose, Ty?
Trick question.
The last one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just the one that you bring to the meeting because you're always the dad too. And so, you know, I think you always think about that, and that's hard, right? Because to some extent, like we need you. I mean, the reason you're here is because you're brokers, and so we need you to bring in the real world experience, the boots on the ground, the what you're seeing. But we also just always want to balance that goal. And so, like, how does consumer protection fit in when it comes to your recommendations, right? Because to an extent, you could always kind of tack on like X, Y, Z, and consumer protection. And do you really mean it? Is that where you're going? Is that the driving force? And are you balancing it with the other objectives? And so I think that's one that's really important to think about. And the hats, like I said, the chair says, "What hat are you wearing?" And so I think that's helpful. Next slide. Okay, so this is an interesting one. This is one that comes up. So you all are advisory committee members, and people know you're advisory committee members, and that's cool. You know, we get a lot of applications. I'm always really astonished by how many people want to serve on these committees. It's really cool. It's an engaged community, but people know, right? People know you're on there, or you say, "Hey, I'm a member," and you know. So then it starts to be, okay, what are the risks for speaking in favor or against certain companies or business practices? It's a little bit heightened there, right? Because to an extent, you're no longer just you. You're an arm of this group. You're a little bit tied to Trek, right? And so I think there's like a little bit of a heightened set of eyes on you. So when you are out there and you're like, you know, I love, what are you doing at CB&A? I love CB&A. They are, without a doubt, the greatest in all of Houston. I wouldn't use anyone else. I would just go with them. They are the absolute best, and everyone else sucks. Which, you know, I don't think has ever been said. But because Houston's a big city. And Cedar Park. So that starts to feel like, okay, is there favoritism towards CB&A? Are we giving them sort of a leg up? The alternative to that is, you know who is the worst in Houston? CB&A. They don't know what they're doing. They're the worst. You know, I don't even think they have an office. They've never even looked at a contract form in their lives. Like, I don't know. I'm making this stuff up because I don't actually know what the negative thing would be, but something like that. And so when you have perceived favoritism or perceived sort of a negative approach, I think you lose the trust of the consumer and the regulated industries because you're here to serve in a specific role. And you can dislike CB&A all you want. or love them. But when you're here, when we're in this role, that's what we want to think about. I also don't want anyone to end up in court. And I said this at ESAC, I won't be there with you. So this is me trying to help you. And I think you want to think about that, right? Because it's like, well, Ty, who's on, I'm just going to keep picking on you, Ty. Ty, who's on BRWG, which is an advisory committee that advises my licensing, my licensing agency, has said all these things about me, and now I can't get any clients, and I'm pretty sure it's just tied to all these things that Ty said. I don't know if that's gonna happen. I don't want that to happen. I don't want to put us in that situation. So I want to advise you that those are kind of the risks. And I am saying this, and if anyone right now feels like I am targeting them, I made a joke the other day that I am. I'm not. I always get real nervous whenever people start creating hypotheticals, and I'm like, they're talking to me, this is it right now. It's obviously Ty, because I keep calling on him. No, I think this is just a message. I'm giving this at every single training, because I want you to just think about that and internalize that. Okay, next. Okay, so here are the things that I will typically bring up, and you all know this because I think I've brought all of these up in every meeting we've had. The governor's letter from 2019. I'm always going to reference that. Honestly, it's a good read. I read it probably every 2 to 3 months. It's on my desktop because I forget all of the stuff that's in there. There's a lot in there. And so if you want a copy of it, I'm happy to send you a copy. You've had it in your materials before, but I think it's always like a really important sort of guidance document. I always keep it in the back of my head and on my desktop. We've also got Regulatory Compliance Division of the Governor's Office. We know that, right? So if there's a rule that impacts the marketplace, it's going over there, and that rule cannot pass without, we cannot adopt that rule.
Can I ask what that means, that first sentence?
Governor's letter?
The governor's letter from 2019?
Yeah, dealing specifically with barriers.
Barriers to entry.
What does that mean?
What does barriers to entry mean, or what is the
Having you
letter?
take a state exam, to get a license is a barrier, right there.
Right, so it's not that you can't have any entry requirement. It's putting up I don't know, I can't remember what the term is that is used in that letter, but sort of unnecessary or increased barriers to entry that don't have, the data, unjustified, yeah, the data behind them,
Okay,
the reason
I like
to do
that,
that.
except who gets to decide if it's unjustified?
The governor of the state of Texas.
Well, and not just the governor, the legislature. And that's a battle that we're fighting in at least one of our issues. I think that we have certain groups of the legislature that are, take that to heart to the extreme degree. But one of our challenges, in my opinion, in the business, certainly I see it on a regular basis, is who gets to make the rules, who gets to make the decision. Back in a previous thing with Douglas O. Mixon, when he went around and did the advertising town hall things. He was at Collin County Association of Realtors, and he was talking about some of the advertising. He says, if you do any advertising that causes the public to think you're in charge of the brokerage, and you're not. Well, one of the people in the group, the brother of one of our commissioners, who want to go nameless, said, who gets to decide that? Dr. Mink says, well, we do. We decide if it's unreasonable, if it's misrepresentation, and at least that clarified, where it hit, who gets to make that final decision. Well, one of our challenges, all of us, without exception, and certainly in this group, we work really hard to comply. We just need to know where the bar is. We need to know what you consider unreasonable, reasonable, not reasonable. We need to know it, and that's a constant challenge. When we went through this advertising thing, I was at an ESAC meeting, which I was fortunate to be on at one time, and one of the track enforcement investigators, who since retired, was in a meeting, and in one of our breaks, I asked her an advertising question. She said, whoa, stop. She pulled over Carrie Lewis, the general counsel at the time, and said, answer this question for Bob. I said, no. If the two of you, if you're one of the senior enforcement investigators, you don't know the answer and you got to go to the general counsel for track, how the heck am I, a broker in the field, supposed to understand this? And that's the problem. So when we look at these and we start talking about, what's unreasonable, what's reasonable, I think what are the tasks? And I'm never gonna be disrespectful to the governor. I can't imagine the life he's living in. But one of our tasks is to try to get a sense of what it is they're really saying to us so that when we want to comply, and we do, what does that mean? And so when we talk about barriers, that takes on so many levels. And we've seen the fussing when we start trying to increase the number of CE hours, the number of requirements to get a license. And we get this little bit of flack without any actual names. Well, there's this group of legislators out in West Texas who say, no, you can't do that. We can't go down that road, because I think one of our responsibilities in this group is to make sure that what we end up with, and this is that protection of the public, are competent people. And if you say, oh, you need a license, here it is, go do good. That's not good for the public, certainly not good for the license holders. So when we work through this, and I think it's a great overall statement, but there's so many hairs on that dog. There's so many shades of that I think we can't ignore, we can't deal with, and we have to respectfully move forward. And one of your roles, I think, and you talked about commencing on advising us, is we come up with ideas, say, well, okay, that might be doable, but here are the obstacles. Here are the hurdles that you're gonna have to get this through the governor's office and the legislature and and that's important to us because it helps us to understand. Doesn't mean we can't still move forward and do it. Just means we have to be aware of the realities of what it's gonna take to get it done. So that particular thing to me is, it's a great statement to make, and it sounds good in any nice, political realm. But in the practical level where we live, it's important to know what that.
Bob, you make a really good point, and that it's kind of like it depends, right? If you make a recommendation that is a legislative change, then that recommendation gets first bounced off of the commission. Do we want to seek this legislative change? Then it gets bounced off of the legislature. Do they want that legislative change? Well, that's that's how that works. With a rule, you make a recommendation, the commission gets to, decide whether to propose and then later adopt that rule with a little pin in that, which it can't be adopted unless regulatory compliance says this barrier to entry is reasonable, or this change to how you do business is reasonable. With a disciplinary action, what advertising is considered, would a reasonable person find this to be confusing to the general public? Our enforcement division gets to decide that based on an investigation and all the facts of the case and what the history is of that brokerage, all the lines. So it depends. But I think we as staff want to be real clear in, okay, this is the type of thing that goes to the legislature. So here are the different box checks that we go through. Oh, this is a rule change, so this needs to go to the commission first with a side of regulatory complaint. Nope, this is already in rule, so this is an enforcement action. To kind of have an idea of, it's important to me that with clarity, we be able to just share with you what you're up against, essentially.
That's a resource that I appreciate, that we have that behind, you've got our back as we're working through all these. Because every once in a while, and I've been in a meeting we'll come up with something really crazy, and you can almost see when as you go, roll their eyes and go, well, let's talk about that. Because we do, I understand it's a crazy business, and we come up with stuff. So it's very helpful that you're there to kind of sometimes bring us back to earth and say, okay, let's think about this.
Yeah, one thing I don't want us to have is personal opinions. I mean, we can have them at home, but in our role here, there's really no room for it. So whatever I think of a certain kind of advertisement shouldn't matter, right?
Yeah.
We follow the rules, we give you the bumpers, that's what.
Yeah.
The other thing I would add to that, just as a separate aside to consider as we talk about these things, is we've got all of these people on the list also, but we've also got powerful stakeholders that weigh in on some of these things sometimes. In the case that Bob is talking about with the proposed advertising rules, when those came out, the Business Issues Committee of the Public Policy Oversight Group at Texas Realtors made a suggestion to the legislative management team over there, and the realtors went to the legislature.
Suggestion is a really nice word.
Yes, I was in that room. The realtors went to the legislature with their opinion on that. So we've got to keep that in mind as well, that, there's a significant number of checks and balances here to make sure that we stay in our lane.
I think that's good. I might add a stakeholder bullet for next year on this one, because I think you're right. Like I said, this is an industry that cares. And so there are a lot of really passionate people and there are a lot of stakeholders. Bob, I think you talk about, we end up in this world here where it's like boots on the ground and, sort of it's not academic, it's not theoretical, but the people who are just kind of like where they're making laws, but they're not actually in the field, or we're writing rules, like I can write a rule, but I don't know, like I'm not there. Bought one house, I don't know if I can buy another house, based on where I live. So that might have been it for my real estate experience. But we rely on you guys to give us that information and to talk it out. I think, I'll send out that letter again on the governor's letter. I'll tell you, Regulatory Compliance Division, brand new. And no one knows yet. And I think they're even doing a little bit of like, okay, we would do it this way here, because they're a new division. I mean, it's been a few years now, but it's something where, I'll reach out to them and I'm like, hey, would this be one of those ones? And they're like, well, we don't know yet until we see it. And, but we have a dialogue with them, and I'm not sure that they, it depends, it's case by case. But I don't want that to stop the conversations here. So I think we'll have them, and this group talks, so I don't worry about this group. I'm also just trying to get this going, and this is great. I think it opens up a little bit of discussion at the beginning of this meeting, so that as we move on with the substantive items, we're also gonna get there, because we've got some good stuff today. Okay, next. Is it my last slide? Oh yeah, okay, we don't have to answer all these questions, but I actually think these are helpful questions and it gives some perspective. This is particularly true when you have new members, but this was a group that was formed 3 years ago, and I'll kind of law school it and call on people, which I always say is my worst nightmare, but I'm gonna do it to you. But so for example, Yasmin, why did you choose to serve on the BRWG? What was your drive to apply?
For me, it was, I've always been a small brokerage, so it's kind of representation for the smaller companies. I wanted to just kind of how you're talking about just perspective. There's so many like big companies, but we're the little guys, like, with a small amount of agents. So I just thought I had that perspective that I wanted to bring in, but also just to be represented as, as the brokerages.
Yeah.
And just kind of our experiences different from the bigger firms or the commercial firms or things of that sort.
Yeah, that's cool. I love that. And you're right? We try and get groups together that are diverse in terms of what they do. Yeah. Neat. So, okay, let's see. Looking around the room, I keep hassling Ty. I'm gonna hassle Chance. Chance, is your understanding of how the BRWG, works different now than it was?
Yes.
How so?
I didn't know that I really knew, I don't really think I had a thorough understanding of how the BRWG would work when I walked in the door, the Zoom door the first time, or the Teams door the first time. Just because my breadth of experience had been on the association side, which is very different than on the state government side. And so, I think it's just come with experience and a depth of knowledge of how this process works versus that process.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, because they're two totally separate.
Very different.
I always remember Chance in those virtual meetings. If you guys remember, he would be like walking.
Pacing back and forth.
Standing, like just always on
Sit
the
still
move.
well.
Yeah. So, okay, okay, hold on. Pam, can you hear me? I'm gonna call on you, Pam.
Okay,
What was the most surprising part of joining the BRWG?
I just think, I think it's the input and kind of the strength of the committee on the changes that we could actually make in our industry and into to the forums, for the brokers, and just be the voice So I think that's really what surprised me the most. I mean, you're on committees, and I'm kind of like Chance is, you're on the state committees, and sometimes it's so much different that I think that was what surprised me, that you can actually see the fruit of your labors when the changes get made.
Cool, thank you. Okay, who wants to answer the last one? Ty.
I'll do it. I'll pick on myself.
Great.
I would say I'm with you, Chance. When I walked in the door, I wasn't sure exactly what I was walking into. I knew that it was gonna be an experience that I really wanted to have. And I guess really it's taken me from seeing Trek in a totally different light. And I mean that in a very positive manner too, because before it was like you send an email and an email comes back, or you get your newsletter, because I've always been on the newsletter thing. I like to read the newsletter. But when you get to know everybody, you've got kids, you've got, interest outside of that, and you really start to see it more of a human organization where we all have our input and we're all fighting for the same thing. And it's really, really cool, because I feel like it's been a real experience that I've really enjoyed doing, and I feel like that we're moving in the right direction. I feel like that we've really made a difference in some things. There's other things I'd really like for us to see done, but
Yeah.
I get it. We can't solve all world's problems in just a couple of years, but I will tell you, it's been a really good experience, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it and really enjoyed getting to know everybody here.
Well, I hope everyone has taken some positives from being on here, and probably also some frustrations. I could see that. And I think that's my last slide, right? Okay, cool. And I will say, it is true, we do get to know each other on a different level, and I think that's neat. Ty will talk to you about Costco for as long as I will, which is a long time. And so, I think it's neat to see cross-state relationships, cross-business model relationships. I think that's really helpful, and that input gets put in here. And then the geography of it all. So I'm gonna stop talking for a little bit until you next need me. And that is your annual advisory committee training. If you have any recommendations or thoughts, please send them to me so that I can further develop it for next year.
All right, any questions on that? Are we all in agreement that only BRWG members should have licenses?
Yes.
Yes.
Knew that was gonna
Just go ahead and make that proposal
It's
now.
not on the agenda for today.
I pretty much thought that was a given.
It's funny, a couple days ago, one of my Facebook memories popped up from 10 or 11 years ago, me venting frustrations about the real estate commission, because I had sent an email and got an autoresponder that said they'll get back to me in 7 days. And I'm like, what other business on earth can respond that they'll get back to you in 7 days in an email? So, my how things have changed, and kudos to staff and commissioners for their hard work in doing that post sunset. So, okay. My favorite part of our agenda, public comment, we have none.
Wow.
So move right past that. I'm gonna throw a little curveball into our plan, if that's okay.
I'm ready.
I'm about to do that, just completely unprepared for it.
Perfect.
I think 6 and 7 kind of tie into each other a little bit. I think both of the conversations are fairly similar, because when we talked in our last meeting, and specifically Mr. Baker brought it up about the E&O insurance requirements and the procedure that he goes through when he brings on a broker associate, I think that it ties into the discussion on broker associates. So what I'm hoping to take out of this discussion today are some very actionable things that we can either take directly to the commission in the next meeting, or have a plan moving forward of these are the specific things that we want to investigate when it comes to that broker associate relationship. And so I think we just open the floor, and I say, let's start with the E&O discussion. And then let's move into supervision and other elements of that. Fair?
So are you saying 6 and 8 or 6 and 7?
6 and 7.
Okay.
Cool. Because I think that when we talked in the last meeting about, it was specific to broker associates.
I think it's different, Chance. I think there's discussion opportunities for business entities within a brokerage that don't involve a broker associate, but rather a licensee forming a business entity. And currently the rules are requiring E&O insurance or a broker to have an ownership position in that entity. And so I think that discussion is a little bit different than the one regarding broker associates. So.
Okay. Fair enough. So let's go down that road.
In our brokerage, we have several licensees who are not broker associates, but realtor associates, who we're encouraging them to market themselves and build themselves as a business.
Right.
And being a business oftentimes includes creating an entity. And registering that entity with a name with TREC and just doing business as Charn Homes LLC with the sales team realtors. But the current rules requiring that entity to have E&O insurance or broker member and part owner of that, it restricts them from doing so. So in essence, it is a barrier for them to move forward in building themselves as a business.
So my thought on that is, when we get those, because I get the same questions, right, in my brokerage. It almost always has something to do with getting paid in the name of the LLC.
That's right.
Right? And that's either for fringe benefits that the tax code allows under the LLC entity structure.
Of course.
Or they are just trying to be able to write off things differently in that kind of thing, in that entity. So I don't know, I mean, I don't disagree with you. We get the question all the time. Our kind of canned answer when we get it is you have to have a broker's license and register your entity with the state. I know that that's not 100% true, because I could go on as an owner of that entity. It's just not a practice that we really like getting into.
But then it begs the bigger question, why?
Well,
Why is E&O insurance required if you're gonna have an LLC, if you're sponsored by a brokerage that covers, that has E&O insurance?
the only issue is, so this is what I've dug into this pretty good. And actually, since I think Bob talked about it the last time, not necessarily that your E&O will cover, if you've got a blanket E&O policy, it doesn't mean that I'm no insurance agent, so, I'm just speaking out from what I've read, but each individual LLC will need to have its own E&O policy, which you can do. The person, if they wanted to open up their own brokerage and then you sponsor it or whatever, or have 10% ownership and they have the E&O policy, they can do that. But the liability aspect of it is bad for brokerages, or for a broker, I would say, just personal opinion, is you're gonna have to have policies and procedures in place because it is a separate entity. Am I not correct? Right? If it's a separate entity, a separate LLC, you should have your own policies and procedures specific to that entity. Your E&O, making sure that you're in compliance on all your advertising and things of that nature. So you as a broker, if you don't already have those set parameters in place, you have to put all that in place as well. It's just a much larger liability to have a bunch of these LLCs going around that you have to monitor and make sure that they've got these things in place, and making sure that if something does go wrong, you're not SOL.
So I'm just gonna say this because I'm still thoroughly confused by all of this, and I know I emailed you and you sent me some clarification. But, and kind of how Bob was just talking, like, if we don't understand it, I might just be, if I don't understand it, like, like the agents, and I have one agent right now that's wanting to do her own, her own.
LLC.
Well,
Team.
and that's her team, but I told her you can't do the LLC because then I have to be part owner. Like I said, I'm thoroughly confused by it. And I'm like, you can't, because I don't understand this whole E&O insurance. If it's a team doing business as under me versus can they create the LLC? Like, I'm so lost by all of this. And like I said, I reached out and I got a clarification, but now you guys are talking about it, I feel like I don't understand it again.
So-
Is it a broker?
No,
So the problem is if a team gets paid directly, so let's just say on a contract, it's, Mary Jo, whatever, right? Mary Jo, and then the team name is, Mary Jo and Associates or something like that, team at the end, right? That's what they call it. Yeah. And then, so is the way, from what I understand it is, if you're gonna get paid because you're the license holder, you can't get paid in the team's name because you're paying an unlicensed, entity,
Correct.
right? Even if it's a DBA or whatever it is, right? But if you have an LLC and it is registered with the Texas Real Estate Commission, you have E&O, you follow the guidelines that way, then you can get paid in it. But on that contract, you wouldn't even use the brokerage name that you work for. You're gonna use the LLC name that you own or work for. And you still are gonna be a licensed associate underneath that LLC, because then
So
the
I'll slightly,
LLC will sponsor that person. Am I not correct, basically? That
that is
individual?
not the way we do it.
Don't you
Okay.
have to be a broker to have an LLC?
that's what I thought.
We do not.
No.
You have to have a
Have
broker
a
attached, hence the rent-a-broker
Oh.
world that we talk about.
Do you want
Mr.
Abby to
Baker?
answer a few of these questions?
So
Yeah.
I might just jump in and just kind of go over what the statute requires, just so we kind of have that framework. So the statute requires that if there is an entity that holds a license, the designated broker essentially has to have some ownership interest in that entity. And the statute uses the term managing officer, but that's essentially what that translates to. So there has to be a broker, designated broker who has some ownership interest in that entity. Now, depending on the amount of that ownership interest, that is what can trigger the E&O insurance requirement. And that is also set by statute. So it's not something, that we just have rules over. That's something dictated by
And
statute.
that's 10%, right?
That's that 10% and it's that $1 million per occurrence. That's where the requirement of E&O insurance. If there is a business entity, which, Chance touched on, lots of folks form for a variety of reasons. If there is a business entity in which it's going to receive compensation, then currently under our statute, that does trigger a license requirement. So that entity would then have to hold a license. Then you go through all those other hoops. There has to be a designated broker with some ownership interest, and depending on that level, that 10% or more, 10% or less, that's what triggers the E&O insurance requirement from us.
One question.
Yes.
So I think this will solve some of the E&O questions. The E&O needs to be coverage for that LLC.
Well, so the statute says provide proof that the entity maintains E&O insurance and then has that minimal limit. Now, I'll kind of look to Denise from the practical side of what we accept, but I think ultimately, there's probably a variety of ways to demonstrate that or demonstrate that proof. We just need to kind of check the box, say, yes, this entity maintains this requirement of E&O insurance, whether that's from one broker's policy that covers this entity. I'm also not an insurance agent, so.
Right, it would have to be named though, in order for it to be proof, right? There'd have to be some sort of name
Which
on
means,
that showing that you had it covered, right?
which means it's probably a business decision on whether or not that designated broker names or not.
Right, yeah,
And then what the
exactly,
structure of that is, right?
right, okay, good to know.
Mr.
Yeah,
Baker, I'm sorry.
I wanted to add from the licensing perspective, we're looking for the certificate of insurance for a broker business entity form. That form says broker's name at the top, business entity, broker license number. Whether, we don't look into or, require or concern ourselves with who actually holds the policy. It's the insurance agent that's signing that this business entity, they can fill this out with the business entity broker, name and license number, and that serves as that proof that the business entity maintains the E&O insurance for our purposes.
Right, so, but and this is what I'm trying to make sure everyone understands. Essentially what they're saying is it must be listed as an insured entity. It can't just be like, Todd Realty Group, and then send that in, hoping that that'll cover that LLC you just started. It has to be specific to showing that that business entity is covered with it listed on there as a covered entity, correct, on the policy?
The certificate of insurance form is what we require.
Yes,
So that certificate has to name the business entity that is
exactly,
being submitted for.
exactly,
So that's
Mr.
only if
Mayor.
you're doing an LLC, like if it's a team,
totally different.
Andre,
Jim is
you
totally
don't need
different
all
because
that
you don't
stuff.
need any of that.
Okay.
So, yeah, so when we talk about business entity,
You just
we
register,
talk
you
about
just
an
register.
LLC, a corporation, those types of entities. If we're just talking about, and, a team name, this gets a little confusing. It could have a team that is also,
Sure.
uses that name and is an entity itself, but, that, I think it's probably
Yeah.
best to keep those concepts
But if it's just a
separate.
team, you just register using the name management tool.
So I think it'd be helpful for us to, I don't think we have a good understanding in this group of how the insurance works, the E&O insurance. As a brokerage owner, could my E&O policy extend to a business entity that we sponsor? Certainly it can on a DBA, a team name or a group name, but could it, once it becomes LLC, could that policy extend to that? And so I think it would be helpful for us to have information from an E&O insurance provider to say, here's how that works.
I mean, I can tell you, practical application, we have added business entities like that as an additional insured.
To your E&O.
To our E&O policies.
That's under
Now,
some umbrella.
under our policies and procedures, that business entity sponsors 0 agents. We still sponsor the agents. If it's a broker associate leading that business entity, that person is still associated with our brokerage.
And then
The
that,
entity just exists.
that creates a
For the purpose of payment.
pathway for your brokerage to pay that entity. And that entity does it carry a license?
Has to.
It's required.
And to carry a license, there must be a responsible broker.
And it can be different from yours, or you're the responsible broker for
It
those?
depends.
And-
But it can
and-
be somebody, another
be
broker
somebody.
other than you,
Depends if
right?
it's somebody who, it depends if the person starting the entity is licensed as a broker.
And if your E&O insurance names that LLC as an additional insured, you're the sponsoring broker. Because it has insurance, you're not required to be an owner, a part owner
I'm
of
not
that
an owner
LLC.
of a, yeah. I'm on the articles of incorporation for the purposes of showing 10% ownership. I have no vote, I have no anything else. No financial interest, no.
So you are a 10% owner in that LLC.
So my question with that, just so I think I'm getting clear on all this. So you're saying a person can do the LLC, but they don't have to be a broker
So,
under you, under your company?
So, under the statute, a license holder, I mean, anyone could have an entity. A sales agent could have an entity. But what the statute requires, there has to be a designated broker for that broker business entity
Okay.
license.
So it
So there
could be
has
the
to be a
broker of the
broker
umbrella
involved.
company, or it could be a
So it
different broker.
could be, if I'm a sales agent, you're my sponsoring broker, you could be the designated broker, if there's another broker out there.
Got it.
A lot of that will depend then on your policies and procedures. What does your brokerage require, if anything, on that particular subject? That's not something particularly regulated, who it has to be, it's not something regulated by us.
Okay.
And
Just that there
Brian,
has to be one.
Brian, just for point of clarification, I'm a 10% owner only when there's not a broker associated.
So what does that do to your liability if that LLC got in trouble?
I mean, the practical application of it is if they're operating under my company, I'm getting sued anyway. So
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter.
Can I ask a quick question, Chance, on how you do this? So if you're sponsoring the agent under your brokerage, the LLC, you're sponsoring that LLC here, but nobody's sponsored underneath that LLC, so you limit your liability there, which is good, it's just basically receiving payment. On the contract, is the contract,
Still,
How are you
it's still
doing
written in my name, CDA comes from me,
okay,
all of those things, because that LLC exists solely for the purpose of receiving payment.
okay,
From
so,
me.
and then you just do it as like a referral or something to that LLC, or?
Just pay them out just on a CDA, like
You
you
do it on a
Just like
CDA.
any other agent,
Okay.
right?
We just look at where on the CDA if the person's licensed. The-
Gotcha.
If you see on something like on document that LLC's not licensed, That just sets up a red flag that this is unlicensed business entity receiving compensation, which is in violation of the License Act, so that we go through the route of sending cease and desist and.
Okay, so let me talk a little bit within the context. I'm glad Abby brought something up here. I think there's a lot of broker policy within this that solves a lot of this. We have a number of business entities, and I've got 2 offices, 2 different E&O companies for each office. And they both require the form that Denise mentioned. We have that's a TREC form that creates that our insurance agent signs off on certifying that business entity. Now, within our policies and procedures, there's only one purpose totally for a business entity, and that's to receive commissions. They're not allowed to advertise it. They're not allowed to have that on their cards. No one in the world, won't be in the contract. The LLC won't show up anywhere. And so far, and we've been doing this for a number of years, we've never had any issue with the business entity from a liability standpoint. And our both of our companies, 2 totally different companies, say, our agents are sponsoring agents under our license and they're covered. And what this does is this just takes care of the E&O requirement from TREC. Now, Abby, you mentioned something, and I'm looking at the statute, and I didn't pull from this what I thought you just said. As I'm a sponsoring broker and I'm the designated broker behind a business entity, and we go through the E&O part, I have zero ownership interest, none whatsoever. And I thought I heard you say that because managing broker that you'll, LLC, for example, it'll show up in their paperwork that I'm a manager in their LLC, but there is no ownership interest. And I thought I heard you say that being that manager in it requires ownership.
Yeah, so what the statute says, and I'll give it to you just so you have reference, it's 1101.355. So it says to be eligible. Oh, great, perfect. So it says a business entity must designate one of its managing officers as its broker and provide proof that the entity maintains insurance if the designated broker owns less than 10% of the business entity.
Well, 0 is less than 10%.
But you've got to designate one of the managing officers as the broker.
Yeah, I understand, but I don't see any requirement from TREC that I have to have any ownership interest, because I do not have, never have had, and it's been approved all the way through.
But you have their insurance. It's the designate the ownership interest, and then if there is less than 10% of that interest, then that is what triggers.
That's when we use that form, we go through, that's what we've got. But I don't,
let me ask
why
you
does it say I have to have some ownership interest? I don't see that.
the first line there, A1, designate one of its managing officers as its broker. So are you a managing officer for these entities?
I'm a manager, and we require attorney has made sure that the corporate documents that they have establish that we have no ownership interest, we have no responsibilities in that LLC.
But you are
We're a manager. We're LLC, we're a manager.
Okay.
And a corporation would be
So
an
I think
officer.
we're talking about the same.
Okay,
Yeah.
but I just want to be clear, because we have 0 ownership interest in any of them. Because, one of our agents said, if I want to make you this, do you get to own part of this? Do you get to tell them? No. We've got to make sure in the documents for the LLC or the corporation, whatever it is, that we're clear about that, and that took our attorneys to make sure that language was there. But I feel like that our brokerage policy, which is in our policy procedures, getting commission, that's it, because they're getting advice from their CPAs. By the way, not all CPAs agree with that. That, hey, you need to take commission as a corporation rather than personally, and it's okay, fine. But that's all they get to do. They don't get to sponsor anybody, they don't get to tell, nobody gets to know they've got an LLC. It doesn't show up anywhere from the public standpoint. So we think that that's totally mitigated our liability issue, because that's the total purpose. Now, if that's wrong, if I can't really solve that problem with my policy procedures and what we set up on that, TREC needs to let me know so we can either stop sponsoring business entities or change or whatever. Because right now, that's our rule.
But they have their own E&O, right?
No, it goes under our E&O. We have the forms that Denise talked
Mutually
about.
insured.
There's a certificate of E&O insurance that our insurance agent signs off on.
Oh,
We have the business entity on that form, which Denise just mentioned, it's got business entity. It has a place for a broker's license number, but that's only for renewals. On the first one, you won't have a license number, because that's a license number of the business entity once TREC forms it, once TREC approves it. So that form, if I understand correctly, Denise, that form is what puts that agent who's formed a business entity under our E&O insurance. That's what our E&O agents tell us.
For the purposes of track, that form shows that that business entity that's licensed as a broker maintains the minimum E&O insurance coverage.
Yeah.
So
So we're
doesn't
covered.
prove who owns it or
Yeah.
is covered
Perfect.
or who's paying for the policy, just.
but
simply-
based on statute, does he have to have ownership though?
No.
No.
All right, hold on, time out. Mr. Roth has been patiently waiting with his hand up, and I'm gonna let him jump in here real quick.
Thank you. And I have some questions, but I'm trying to sort of understand what the purpose of the discussion is. It's really, we're here to, the requirement for E&O or the ownership interest is really sort of, we're focusing on protecting the consumer, right? So it seems like to me that in the old days, everybody was a broker and nobody worried about tax consequences and liabilities and teams. They were just operating themselves. So the guy who was the consumer knew who they were knew that if the guy treated them wrong, they could sue him, they could go after him, they could report him to their licensing. Well, now the world is complicated. We've got, everybody wants to formulate companies or LLCs to protect themselves for tax purposes and for liability purposes. And so the consumer needs to know that who they're dealing with, they're going to be able to have some recourse, that the LLC or the company can't blow up and they've got nobody to get protection from. So it seems like to me that the way the rule seems to be written is that as long as you got a designated broker who's an owner of the company, then the consumer's got some recourse against somebody at some point if they're mistreated from that standpoint. And if you don't have a designated broker who's an actual owner, like in Bob's situation, where you've got a company and you don't have a designated person, then the requirement is you got to get some E&O for that entity, so that if there is a problem, there is some recourse, there is some opportunity for the consumer to be able to have a place where they can get money or they can get some recourse for that. And it also allows the entity to have defense if there's an improper claim against them. So I'm a little bit confused as to what the issue is that we're trying to debate. Is it, or to try to understand, is it that we don't want to have E&O, or that we don't want to have an owner required to be a partner? I mean, a broker to be a partner, or are we concerned that having E&O or having a designated broker is somehow reducing our opportunity to do business? I'm really asking a question. I really don't understand what the issue is we're trying to solve. Maybe Chance, you can help.
I cannot. Because I'm not 100% sure I know what the problem we're trying to solve is either. I think we're just, honestly, Bill, having a discussion on, is there a problem?
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Mr. Baker.
Okay, so I'm sorry, go ahead.
No.
To go a little bit to what Bill just asked, first of all, if you do it in the manner in which I do it in my offices, there is no corporate liability protection, because you're not advertising under that corporate entity. So you have none whatsoever. No one knows that, in my case, Jan Ritchie, for example, one of my business entity, no one knows about her business entity. She's still Jan Ritchie. She's actually a broker associate in my office. And so if they're going to have some problem with her, then that still comes from me. There is no business entity complication there because of the way that we're set up. I don't know if other brokers allow their business entity agents to advertise or do, I don't know. I would think that would complicate things somewhat, but in our case, a business entity gets a commission to that license holder, that license, and that's it. There's no other involvement. They don't do business under it. When somebody is gonna sue one of my agents or file a direct complaint, it's because of what that agent has done, and they're gonna come after that agent and of course the broker going through the process. But has nothing to do with some corporate entity they may or may not have, because it's not involved in any level in the transaction.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's how we do it exactly the way that you're talking about, same thing. And, you know, I think our business entity licensees, when you look at it, fall into one of two categories. It's either some random business entity because a broker associate wants to get paid into an LLC, or it's a broker associate or a team leader who forms an LLC that's basically the team name, right? And
they go through the state to form the LLC.
Right.
And set it up.
Right, exactly. And so they just want something in their team name, and that's fine. Either way, at the end of the day, our approach to them are the same. And, you know, we have essentially the same rules as Mr. Baker's talking about is, you know, you're not gonna advertise the name of that LLC. You're gonna follow the team name advertising rules, all of those things. And, you know, we've never had issue with it, ever.
I think when this came up, it was a little bit of a confusion point that sort of revealed that perhaps there's confusion around this topic in general. I know that we get questions on like, wait, there's actually a section in our course book, like, I need a license for that? Because I think people didn't think that, and so it's been a little bit confusing. I'll say, I think this conversation's been helpful. It seems like there's been some clarity on like, no, it's this. I think, now you never know what's gonna happen. I think we're gonna see legislation. We saw some last year, and I think it's gonna come back again that addresses, that sort of carves out the LLCs that are solely for the purpose of receiving the commissions, the compensation. And I think that probably will bring more clarity, right? Because I think people get confused because they're like, no, my CPA told me to do this. I would have to be licensed. All it's doing is that's just what I get paid into, that's a benefit. And then when we look at our statute, it's like, well, in order to receive that, you've got to have the license, and then there's all these requirements for business entity license. So I think we'll see a carve out that will help eliminate some of that confusion. I don't know that we will, because you never know what will pass, what won't. It didn't pass last time for no reason other than like that's the legislature and things get lost or don't happen. So I'm hopeful that will help. But I think that confusion is certainly an issue that we see, and we try, and we've got some articles out on it. Like I said, we put it in the course book just to make sure everyone understands those requirements and why.
Can I ask a question since we have a Texas Realtor staff person in the room with us?
She's gonna be so excited.
I know you're so excited to jump in on this. There had been some discussion last year when the idea of the new healthcare coverage for members was batted around, that in order to be eligible for that, you were going to have to be under a business entity. Because that would throw a massive.
I'm not sure that they have to be in a business entity. I know that they have to join
The union. Right.
But I can certainly look into it.
Okay, because that would, if we all of a sudden have, 100,000 people that need to be a business entity, that changes things.
Yeah.
Well, and for something other than.
Yeah, for something other than the purposes of license.
That's what that carve out could potentially be.
Yeah.
So that's a good point.
Okay.
You have another comment.
Oh, Pam, hi.
Hey, I understand on that Texas Realtor that is not the case with the LLC, because I actually had a rep tell me that they don't have to be an LLC, because that was my fear too.
I know that it had been a conversation at one point, and since I left exec, I don't get it. I don't get all those emails anymore.
Yeah, there was somebody that was on the exec committee that told me that, so.
Okay, good. Well, that answers that. Never mind. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions on that bullet point? comments? No? Awesome. Question, because I think number 7 is probably gonna be a longer discussion. Do we need to take a quick break for everybody?
Yes, please.
All right, is 10 minutes okay?
Perfect.
All right, let's take a 10-minute break. We'll reconvene at 11:25.
And I'm going to mute.
All right, so let's, like all great ideas come in the bathroom. We were having some conversations during the break.
TMI.
Yeah.
It's kind of discriminatory.
How would you,
But there was
Quorum.
not
Quorum.
there was no quorum, that's right. How would y'all feel if we suggested to the commission at the next meeting that there be some sort of database of, for lack of a better term, a white paper on how to register a business entity properly, so that we have this kind of how-to manual for a broker? What happens if you die?
SOPs.
You know, just some basic white papers on succession, on registering entities, on whatever some of the more common issues, the common phone calls that come in, those kind of things are. How would you feel about making that suggestion? Go ahead.
I have no feelings about that suggestion whatsoever as a member of staff. But we, as support, we could share with you what is currently on our website. But then it seems right for kind of a highlight from a communication standpoint of, you know, of whatever we're lacking in terms of whatever's not available on our website are hard to find. Just kind of highlight that issue and provide a how-to of sorts. That less white papery, which kind of reads lawyer-like,
Right.
and more.
Yeah, I don't want to tell a broker how to do their business. I just want to say, hey, here are some things to consider if you die.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Great idea.
hopefully you should consider it before you die, but.
Right.
I think we actually have something on our website with
I was
the,
gonna say, I
with the
think I've seen
headline.
something.
Here's what you need to do before your broker dies or something, and it sounds a little irreverent, but
No, we've got that in course books as well.
yeah,
Sure.
but
Succession.
a redo of that, it would
I think, yeah.
get us there.
Okay.
Chance, this deviates a little bit from that thought, but after the last commission meeting, I got a call from a gentleman, I think out of Dallas or something. He's a broker and a teacher, and he's like, everybody keeps using these words, best practices. He goes, who decides what best practices are? How do you define best practices? And maybe there's some way to bullet point some best practices somewhere or talk about that, because it's been asked a couple times. How is that being judged? Exactly.
Well, it needs more minimum standards, you know, like, what we've been saying, in talking about the redo of broker responsibility, curriculum, is that we're trying to provide some best practices, but we regulate to minimum standards as a regulatory entity.
Has everybody seen the new broker responsibility course?
No.
No.
I think you're gonna really like it when you do see it. We went through the train the trainer the other day, and is Groovy on the call?
No, she's not.
It would have been cool if she had, because I don't know what happened in Dallas and Austin and other places when they did the train the trainer, but the really cool thing about doing the train the trainer was as we were putting the content together for the broker responsibility course, really we designed it so that it would get people asking questions about things, right? It was, hey, if you were gonna build a new agent training program from the ground up, what would this look like? And as we're going through these sections, all the trainers were asking questions like, well, what about this? What about that? And we're like, this is exactly what we wanted. And so I was encouraged sitting there it was Amos and Carrie and me and Byron Underwood from Champions were the 4 in the Houston market that were part of the writing group. I was super encouraged by what we saw by that because it worked exactly the way we wanted it to.
And what happens when people do it by correspondence, just online and don't have the teacher?
You have to have a teacher. Yeah, I
Don't
can
Zoom.
speak to that.
No.
Yeah.
You have to have a way to interact with an instructor, at a minimum, with a reasonable response time. And additionally, with a correspondence course, you should also be required A correspondence course that's approved by us would never be completely a PDF that you do on your own. New correspondence as we define it now, requires you to log in to some form of an interactivity and engagement.
Is that you?
Yeah. 'Cause
No.
that was
No,
never
I-
the case.
No, that
That's
absolutely
not the case.
100% not.
No.
I just, no,
Okay.
yeah, no.
I think I sent you.
Can broker responsibility be taken by correspondence?
Yes,
It can be as long as there are those interactive elements to it.
but there's not.
Do we call that online? Are we missing terms or?
No,
Okay.
there's online, which is fully engaged online with.
In real
No.
time?
Not in real time.
Okay, got it.
So there's kind of four now, right? We have regular classroom, which is what we're doing right now. You know, you're here, you have an instructor. There is classroom through technology, which are your Zoom classes. So you're
Real
being
time.
monitored, you know, and you have an instructor and you're engaging. Correspondence, which is to some extent, here's some information, you're required to read this on your own. We require word count studies or seat timers or something to make sure that there's sufficient information being shared in that course throughout the materials to satisfy the requirement, but then like the non-elective courses require interactivity and the engagement of an instructor. The instructor may not need to be online with you at that time, but needs to be able to respond to any questions within like 24 hours. They have to show that there is an engagement there.
I think I did mine last year, online.
Well, if there's an issue with delivery, we're not approving them that way. So if there's an issue in the industry, you know, if there's a distinction between what we approve and what is happening out there, that's something that's important for us to know.
Yeah.
There have been long conversations over the years at ESAC, and Bob was, I think, part of this back in the day when correspondence was the big topic. It's like, is there value or is there not value?
That's an understatement.
And,
Yeah.
you know, so, but anyway, that's off topic.
Well, I guess it's important because if this course was designed to have that back and forth, and back to your question, if people can take it and not have that, how is that gonna work out? I'll tell you the course I use that doesn't have it.
Well,
No, I'm saying I'm gonna send it to you separate. I'm gonna send it to you separately so you can look into it.
We'll put that on our list to recommend to the commission that they're, you know, I feel like Summer's probably in the background already published she's already got a content calendar being made up.
Well,
But
any issues with the
we'll talk
course
about it.
delivery or development would be ESAC's purview. So we can bring that up.
Partner.
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
can bring
for
that
sure.
up to them again. So,
All right, moving on to agenda item number 7 is discussion and possible action regarding broker associates, including identifying affiliations among license holders on Trek website. When both Vanessa and I went back to last meeting and listened to the recording, there was discussion on this, but there was never really like a fluid idea wrapped around it, or let me rephrase that. There was never a concrete idea wrapped around it, it was just very fluid discussion. And so this is where I really wanted to get, like, let's get some talking points out there on what exactly the concerns are. And then if we need to go back to staff and get historical perspective, if we can sit here in this room and figure it out, we either take the recommendation or we get more information and talk about it at the next meeting, one or the other, but I just wanted to make sure we got some concrete points on this. So, who wants to start? Not everybody all at once.
The way I remember the conversation is that we were talking about different education requirements for brokers who sponsor agents and broker associates who don't sponsor any agents.
Right.
And I think our
We're talking about
conversation kind of centered around
differentiating
those
between,
two separate, those two types of licenses.
We had talked a little bit about differentiating between a broker and a sponsor.
And how to associate that associate broker with a business entity.
Right. So to me, that's the big one, because so I've got pulled up on my computer right now, one of my broker associates. Now, this is a person who is a good, educated broker associate, been in the business for a long time. But if I'm a consumer and I pull up his license, I have no way of knowing that there's, and going back to the lines on the IABS, I have no way of knowing there's somebody above this person's head to complain to if I have a complaint, just by searching his license.
And I think, I agree with you that sometimes a broker associate shows up independent of the sponsoring brokership. I'm a broker associate in our company. My wife is the responsible broker. But if you search me, I show up underneath that brokerage and underneath so that's how you see me. And so I think there's a difference in the way that they show up on the track website.
That is
That's weird.
Question
I'm
too,
gonna search for
actually.
you.
Yeah.
because
How
that's
does
weird.
That is weird.
How does a Trek complaint go out? So, Mike, I know you can answer this one easy.
Well, that's because it's got you as a designated broker for it.
Oh, that's probably what it is.
So, yeah, we're
That's why.
statutorily required to join in. If a complaint comes in against XYZ sales agent or whatever, they are required to join in their sponsoring broker. So that may be the, business entity and then the designated broker for the business entity.
What if, and this is the kind of the weird thing, what if you don't get page, the page that shows the brokerage information on there, and someone files a complaint against that individual, but they are a broker themselves, but they are associated with that brokerage, but how do you know that they're associated with that brokerage?
We ask if necessary.
Okay,
You have to understand the statute, there's no mention of associated brokers.
right,
So,
Right.
if a broker associates themselves with an associated broker, they're gonna have to do some sort of independent action in order to be liable under the License Act.
got it.
That broker that people associate with, they're responsible, just like a sales agent in certain aspect, for all of their actions.
Got it.
That broker they may associate with, only really under the rules for advertising, we can probably join that person in. Or if that other associated broker, or the one maybe level up, sticks their head out and does something or whatever, that gets themselves more involved than that. But,
Got it.
if the broker writes something, that associated broker writes something wrong on a contract or negligence or that, it's on them, it's not on the one up there, because we can't,
Got it.
statutorily, we can't link it
Connect
to unless they get involved in the transaction.
If it's some type of civil litigation or something.
That's totally different.
Totally
Yeah,
different
we don't wanna get
Right.
involved in that. It's
I'm
possible they
definitely,
can
that
join
sponsored
in on
broker's
that
definitely
stuff,
certified.
but
Yeah, yeah,
Right, but that's
exactly.
not the, that's
from
that's
an
not the
administrative
regulatory.
perspective, from how we, that's, administrative law.
And to make sure that we're all associated correctly, if the associate broker, if they're supposed to be associated with that business entity, all they're using is that address, correct?
I think
They're
that's
updating
what
their
we
address.
recommend people, because you have to have a business physical, so
Mhm.
if you're associating yourself with one broker, you need to go in there and fix that's
Use
gonna
their
be-
address.
Use their
Correct.
address.
That's what we require.
Yeah,
As
that's
part
what
of
we
our
say too.
policy and procedures, they have to. So my question would be then, if this guy that I've got pulled up on my screen, that's one of my broker associates, were to get a license complaint, would I know about it?
No, unless we chose to join you in,
Very rare.
it's
right?
very rare.
Okay, so
Because we
if the
stop at the
broker,
broker, essentially.
Yeah, well, if we go out for
Yeah,
investigation,
to
we'll
me is
ask who
kind
are
of
that
problematic.
and how other people are involved. But like I said, you're not
I know.
technically liable under the License Act, so.
okay, but if this broker associate that Chance has in his office and he's got an independent contract agreement with them, if in their response to the Trek letter, about the situation, if he gives information in there that makes it clear that the reason he did something wrong and he didn't understand because his broker didn't explain it to him.
Well, he's a broker.
That pulls
He's
his
a
broker
broker,
Chance.
he's gone through all that, he's gone through all those hoops, so there's clearly a higher expectation we have for brokers. It's like, your stuff, so you're allowed to go out and you can learn, you don't need a sponsorship, obviously,
Okay,
for
I
brokers.
love your optimism that you don't through all those hoops and you've got a broker
Well,
license.
I'm just saying by that, I'm not saying there's not
Yeah.
people that don't have
Yeah.
minimum standards and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
but
It's also,
I don't link them in, we can't link them in under the statute.
I think that's what you're saying, so there's a regulatory relationship between broker agent, right? Like that's in statute, we've got the ability to do that, but, and Abby always says like, from the Trek side, we stop when we get to broker. So if the broker associate does something, we go, I mean, I'm gonna say go after, that's probably not the right term, but go after that broker associate and not that business relationship they have with the brokerage. Unless there is some act by that entity, that broker that ties in, you know, and I think that's very few and far between. So, you know, from a business standpoint, like Chance points out, he's like, no, I'm definitely going down if there's a civil lawsuit. Maybe, I have no idea, probably, I wouldn't be surprised, right? But truly, like what we have in statute is broker agent, there's not, like associate broker doesn't exist, we just have brokers and agents.
But if somebody was working under my umbrella or my name, and they got a letter from Trek, even though they're a broker, I would wanna know, because they're operating under my name.
I agree.
Would that be, do y'all see that as more of a brokerage policy? Like you
Yes.
are obligated, like.
You can't
because
trust
we're
that
in-
somebody's gonna do that. It's kinda like people turning stuff into y'all, but they don't do it. So
Right.
if I find out later that this person did something that could hurt my reputation or my
Absolutely.
brokerage, I would wanna be on the proactive side versus the reactive side.
Correct. And I think, I
That
mean,
makes total
I think the
sense.
relationship, regardless of license type, is the same because, I mean, they're signing the same independent contractor agreement as anybody else is.
Insurance
You know, yeah, all of
What
that.
But
What about-
I know that that's not,
speaking.
I know that that's not
Yeah.
regulatory speaking, that's
No,
not
I
statute speaking.
totally,
Yeah, I get it too.
That's more,
people
I
you wanna
mean, there's an
know
element of
what's going on.
CYA there.
Yeah, because they would help you
And
civilly.
upfront,
yes.
and upfront damage control
Yeah.
and blah, 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 blah.
You've got Bill.
Hey, Bill.
I think the point that Leslie brought up, I think is really the excellent point, is that it really seems to me that the issue is notification of the brokerage. And that's what we really want to make sure that somewhere that folks that don't have to be officially associated with the brokerage as a broker associate, but that the main brokerage responsible party does in fact get some notification. I think that would be, maybe that's the focus that we should be thinking about, is how do we get some kind of notification to the public that, or to the general population, even in our industry and the public. How do we sort of make sure that those folks are identified? And I think the other point that came up, I think, is excellent. It really should be a policies and procedures issue, but maybe we could just focus on some kind of a registration policy with Trek, that if somebody is a broker associate, if it's not already done, and maybe I just don't know what the rules is and how it's done, but if there's not a form that somebody could send in saying, this guy's a broker, but he's really acting as an associate under our brokerage, that might be an interesting solution and not really that hard to manage, and it may not be that sort of tough on the brokerage community to comply with, because I don't know how often and how frequent and how much of an issue that really is anyway.
I think the extension of that is if the member of the public goes to the Trek website to search that broker associate, one of the results we would want is for them to see who the responsible broker is. So they could contact the responsible broker rather than Trek,
100%.
I would want to know, Leslie would want to know, Chance would want to know, come to me first, let's solve the problem.
I think the broker would want to know, but what I'm hearing you say from a statutory standpoint, that broker they're associated with is not responsible.
Right.
Right.
That's where I was headed. It seems like from a statutory standpoint and a practical standpoint, there may be kind of a miss. In that statute says you get to broker, you're done. They're the responsible entity. Probably not from a civil liability standpoint, but
Certainly.
that's not us. But in a practical standpoint, operating in the profession, that's not what y'all believe to be true. The associated broker has a boss, essentially.
A sponsor, a sponsoring broker.
Right. Okay.
And by virtue of that ICA,
Well,
they are following our policies and procedures, they're advertising under our name, they're all of these things.
And I think our miss is that there's no room, we've got to go really kind of bounce it around to determine whether or not there's even a centimeter of room in the regulatory context to basically accommodate the professional need. It sounds like.
As it is now.
Chelsea, is there a way to maybe utilize the address possibly in
We've
somehow
gone down
do it
that
that way?
road,
Yeah.
and it doesn't seem accurate.
Doesn't show what you think. We actually worked with our IT department in the interim to see if that would work. And it doesn't do what you think it's going to do.
Okay.
Because that is information we collect already, right?
Right.
So it sounds like what we'd be talking about is the agency collecting new information. So we need to figure out what the most appropriate vehicle is for that. Is it a statutory change? Like, are you creating a regulatory relationship? Is it, is there somewhere in rule that we can find it? We've been looking, I'm not sure. But I think, this group could look at making a bigger recommendation to the commission to explore that relationship. But I think, it is important it's different than broker agent, right? It's broker to broker. So our associate brokers, as I understand it, who are broker associates who, they're with multiple groups, right? So what does that look like? And so I think these are, I understand what everyone's saying. I'm just pointing out,
just looking for a simple solution.
Yeah, it's not, I made myself a diagram, it's a dotted line between associate and brokerage, and it's a straight line to agent because that's where that statutory relationship is.
So Brian said to look him up.
Well, I became a designated broker of our LRFO.
But I think it makes a good point.
Yeah.
Right? So if I look up my guy that I've been using as this example, the only thing that would indicate to anybody is the physical business address that he's associated with my brokerage. Now, there's one person in this room that knows that address, and it's me, right? None of y'all would have any idea if you looked up that person and would know that he's somehow associated with me. When you look up Brian, he has designated broker 4. What if and it's probably not in this computer system, it's probably in the new computer system. If we go down this road, it would just say associated broker with, and add a list of the brokers that person may or may not be associated with.
Does it mean the same across the industry? Does that association, is there commonality of what that business relationship means?
I would not say across the industry, I would say across the state of Texas.
Yes.
Because like we brought up, in other states, everybody's a broker.
Sure.
But in Texas, if somebody's gonna go get their broker's license and be an associated broker, they're going to 99 times out of 100 advertise themselves as broker associate.
Right.
Maybe something on the IABS form, additional line, if associated broker, something in there, kind of like what Brian just talking about, so broker associated with, kind of thing, but maybe an extra line or something in the IABS form.
But it was more for our purposes as brokers, sponsoring other brokers.
Bill?
Yeah, I'm sorry I thought my comment was gonna be that I don't think it's really a regulatory issue. I don't think it's something that we need to mandate to anything, but I think it sounds like to me that if I'm it's my company, I'm the broker, I'm gonna wanna know that I've got a place where I can post the relationship of an associated broker. So if Trek just would be able to to allow the broker, the designated broker for the company, or the broker who owns the company, to be able to have a place where they can say this guy is an associated broker and is really sort of working for me, then I think we've solved the problem of being able to be identified, notified, without having to make it a legislative issue that's going to take 2 years to get done.
What if it's something we couldn't achieve through like the name management tool?
Right.
Have DBA team, broker associate, you click that broker associate, enter their license
Ooh,
number,
that's a good
and all of
idea.
a sudden it shows up on both.
Ooh, that's a really good idea, actually.
Like,
Because
I know
mine's already
nothing about
there.
IT other than how to spell IT.
But the line's already there. Like,
And add them in.
this is
Yeah,
Brian's,
I
like,
think
so it would
that's-
just be a line item there.
So I think,
Do we feel good making this
I was
recommendation?
gonna say, I think the recommendation is to explore that solutions to the, to that relationship.
Identification of a broker associate to the public via the website, but also notification from a regulatory standpoint when it comes in. To the
Sure.
associate.
Right, because that's, I mean,
Yes.
so now we're
So that would be
starting.
different, because there's rules in there that require us to send that information to the sponsoring brokers.
Yeah, no,
So we would
they're
have
two
to-
totally separate
yeah,
issues,
so,
for
yeah.
sure. But I think that they're both worth the commission having a conversation about.
Totally,
Yeah,
and they can direct us and we can try and figure out, what the possible approaches would be. But yeah, the bigger recommendation from this group.
Awesome.
Well, is it necessary, sorry to interrupt, but is it
No.
necessary to maybe just rather than saying you have to do it, but that it allows the broker, of the main broker, the owner of the company, to have that option to identify those people for themselves and for the public. In other words, it's really in my best interest as the broker owner of the company to make sure that people know who's really working for me. And if I don't want to have them posted, I don't have to do it. But if I want to make sure that they're posted, I would have that opportunity without having been regulated or mandated.
And that's something that we've talked about too, Bill. I think that's a good point. I think we are just gonna have to like lay out all of the, once there's direction from the full commission to look into this, I think we could look into that, right? So that would be an optional item, essentially. So that one tracks a little differently now. It's not requiring and then you don't always have it, et cetera. But you're right, maybe that's a little bit of a middle ground. I don't know, but we can look into all of that. And I like the perspective you give on it being the the main broker, I don't know what the word is for this, because it's a different relationship, but they're the ones that are putting it. The broker, I would say the brokerage.
Designated broker, whatever, have that name.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah.
All
I
right,
think it's a good one.
so we'll make both of those
Well,
recommendations.
Yeah,
We need to make a motion for that? Oh, we need to make a motion for that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna make two separate motions if everybody's cool with that. So the first motion would be something along the lines of a motion to ask the commission to look into public notification via the Trek website that a individual broker is associated with a brokerage entity or some sort of, for lack of a better term, sponsoring broker.
So moved.
Okay,
I'll second it.
there we go. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. The second motion would be a recommendation to the commission that when a broker associate receives some sort of license complaint, that the brokerage entity, sponsoring broker, whatever that terminology that we need to figure out looks like, also receives notification.
So moved.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion?
When complaints usually come in, does it have the business name with it?
That's not.
No.
depends. Some people do their research, they have the business name. A lot of times it's just, Sally salesperson. Then we do the research.
Right.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes.
I have before we move on to that, since we're just in this topic.
No, we're not closing the discussion on the topic. These are just two motions just to get that piece of the puzzle done, so.
So for my brokerage, we're two co-owners, we're two brokers, and we're both designated brokers, but on the Trek website, we can't both be designated brokers. It only allows the one person. Why?
I'm in the same boat. Husband and wife, co-owners, he's the designated broker, I'm the broker associate. But in business practice, you know, all of our sponsored agents will come to me just as well as her.
Yeah, exactly, like we're both managing.
Yeah.
But there's no reference for that person, I guess, unless you put them as a supervisor, but
Well,
that's.
I was gonna say on the IABS, you could just go designated broker, then like you, Brian, and then yeah, you see, you could do something like that. Supervisor.
But I'm just curious of like why you can't have two,
Then I don't get equal billing.
like statute wise.
Yeah, so I mean, it kind of just goes back to the purpose of the designated broker. So under statute, you know, it requires a designated broker, just like it requires a sponsoring broker. Really, the purpose is so that we have a person when we are trying to contact that entity for whatever reason, enforcement or license or whatever, there's an actual point of contact person. Again, that's different from maybe what your internal structure and your policies and procedures might dictate about, you know, or even your, you know, governing documents for the entity about who has authority. But for our purposes, it's really more about, can we put an individual person behind this entity to be able to contact?
Would it be against any sort of regulation to add more in the system or in the new system or however it is?
I don't know if it's like that there's a prohibition. I think the statute just requires that you designate one.
Right.
Maybe that would be a prohibition. I haven't really thought about that.
There would be an option to have.
What would be the, like, from the Trek standpoint, why would that, what would the expansion be for?
We're both as responsible, so, you know.
Because to me, it seems like so you've got a scenario with two, but like, what if there's 35, and so now we've got like 35 versus the one point of contact that we have listed?
I think that improves your situation.
It really complicates enforcement.
Yeah,
I think it starts to.
Yeah, okay.
When you join in 40 designated
I want to go
brokers,
down that road.
Right.
then who advised who's
I didn't
responsible
know
for
anything
what?
about
It's
this.
like, I have no idea, I only handle I'm the designated broker for the property management section of this.
I think probably just needs to be listed as a supervisor, right?
Yeah.
Because then it shows up. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, these
No,
are good.
yeah, no, I can see the back end craziness.
That is a fair peg round
It was
hole though,
like-
isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, for my picture of two, it's so simple, but then like 40, 50.
She gets all the money, at least I'd like equal
That
billing.
seems better.
I want equal billing.
All right, do we have any further discussion on the broker associate,
Broker associate what?
the broker associate topic?
I mean, what have we decided on broker associate? Have we,
Well, we have two motions passed,
no, we've done
but
those.
outside of that, table's still open for whatever discussion wants to be had.
Example, we've got the item
doing
in the
that
materials.
Yeah, do we want to go through that?
Do you go through what?
My concern is, and we've talked about this, is if you're an associated broker and you're working for under Chance's umbrella, and you're also working under Yasmin's umbrella and my umbrella, because you can as associate broker, I mean, who's to say that you're not doing business for Chance under my roof with my expenses or it's all kind of confusing of whose liability is what. Because as an associated broker, you can work for anybody at the same time.
I guess the liability just falls directly on the broker,
The transaction number?
yeah, but whoever's name they put at the top is who would fall underneath, like, as far as the entity goes.
But like, what if you gave your person a lead and they go work it but then take it over to Chance's and write it up.
It'd be against your independent contractor agreement, and that would be civil, my thought. But I agree, I mean, I think it's kind of crazy that that's even possible, but I mean, I guess it is what it is.
Isn't this back to the statutory versus best practices type of thing? I think that's just because the statute allows that. You can be program multiple firms, which I.
Right.
But the reality is, best practices, every independent contractors agreement, every policy procedures manual would address that, and it's gonna be up to the civil matter of the brokers. And I don't think that's gonna fall into the track regulations at all. You know, she's not gonna be able to file a complaint to track because the way he went over and took it over to Chances and got paid over there and got my lead and track says, well, have a nice day. So, name track is, I wouldn't think, Mike, is that right? I wouldn't think that's a track matter. That's a civil matter between the brokers. I've been able to
And the
control the
client-
broker associates.
It's
And
just
the
an
client always
opportunity
belongs
to
to-
get very messy.
Yeah,
Oh, for sure.
And
100%.
and then basically you look at this, Leslie, too, is that client, it sticks with the broker, right? So technically, I guess there's no issue.
If you know about
I
it.
mean,
Yeah.
Yeah,
not
if you know
if
about
it's, if you have it all, you have to have it all written up and everything else.
Yeah, that's a slippery slope.
So that agenda item number 7, that little scenario
Yes, sir.
we have here, could I ask respectfully, who created this? I've gone through this 17 different times and I still don't understand it. We got so many different brokers and entities and
I think
names and sponsors and broker associates and somebody sponsored by one of the broker associates and I go, did you come up with this, young lady?
this is,
I'll take,
this is a new
definitely
example.
take credit in that.
It's a hard math problem. You have to figure out.
Yeah. I
No,
believe.
so I think the purpose of this scenario, so this is taken loosely from a real life scenario. I think what it represents is that there's room for confusion and what's really happening out there versus what's contemplated in statute and it's maybe that disconnect between like the what it should be and what's actually happening. And I don't know that, to some extent, this one seems like, well, maybe this is just a problem on many levels that doesn't actually tie to what a broker associate is, like this is a scenario issue. Or maybe, we have this ad hoc working group that's starting in, I think it's in February, that talks about like brokerage activity across multiple brokerages. Maybe associate broker fits in better there. But just, this was something the Commissioner Lerner brought to us to say, this is what we're seeing, this is what's out there, it's confusing.
Did Commissioner Leonard create this? Did you make this?
She
up?
didn't create anything. I had the situation and Vanessa turned it around, not turned it around, she helped us take actual names out to illustrate.
She protected the company.
I think I sent you some stuff that maybe understand it better.
Yeah, yes, and I mean, I will say, like, listen, you know what was hard? Changing all the names on this.
I know, that's great. I literally, knowing the situation, sat there and read it and tried to put it all into one organized piece. It's
Which
very
is
hard.
essentially the issue,
Yeah.
right? This is very hard to follow.
Yeah, very hard.
So when you're trying to figure out who's responsible and can't figure it out, it's very hard. Right?
So this person has a brokerage in her name that she is not the broker of, but she also has a team that operates at a different brokerage in the same, very nearly the same name as the broker. So there's a lot of confusion and apparently there's some cross-working with.
See, and I know, going back on it, it would be so helpful if on when you put a license, there was some sort of list, just like for a designated broker, it shows the company name. But there's nothing like that for this kind of thing, to follow like, okay, this is the way this works.
This ties to this.
Yeah.
And that maybe ties back to the motion you guys have just made.
Yeah, I think so.
And this.
But it also goes to what we were talking about, working for two different companies.
And there's a working group that's gonna talk that through, cause
Yeah.
that, we're grappling with that. How do you do that? What does that mean?
Right.
Are a lot of people in the industry doing it? Is that okay?
Well, and that's why I think with this scenario, I think it's helpful to see for this group and to talk about, especially based on the conversation we just had with the motions. But, you know, is this something that maybe gets kicked over to that group to discuss, you know, the scenarios that are really being seen? Because I think that group is hoping to collect the real world scenarios. Because, you know, I remember being at Arello and Commissioner Lerner asked the question of, you know, do you all allow for brokerage activity across multiple brokerages? And everyone was like, no. Well, like, except in this scenario, and this scenario, and this scenario, and if you have this and that, they're like, then totally. And it's like, okay, so it's really not, it doesn't seem like there was a black and white answer. And so then thinking, okay, well, what do we know that's out there right now? Like, what do we know that's happening? And so this might be a scenario, I mean, this might also be a scenario where like this is just kind of wild. Or is this something that's happening? On a bigger, you know, one person doing it is one thing. But is it a bigger pattern practice? So maybe it's something that goes over there too. I don't know, I think this group could make that recommendation. You could talk about it more, you could look into, you know, whatever you wanna do with it, but I think it's probably a bigger conversation that's happening.
Because I think, I mean, that fits right into where that group is playing, because, I mean, this particular situation I'm intimately familiar with, the actual non-protected names. Because when she made her switch from one to the other, a bunch of her agents came to work for me.
Let's be cool.
But there is an element of confusion that, you know, it would not be hard to see this and think that. And I think from a consumer protection standpoint, that's not what we're looking for.
Plus the advertising dollars from the umbrella company is promoting her that she could be taking to this other.
That's right. Yeah. It's kind of dishonest. It's an ethical, I would think it's
that's an
on the
But
realtor
there's
side,
nothing
it's kind of
that
an ethics
prevents-
violation.
Our rules don't prevent it though.
Yeah.
so.
But the broker's policy and procedures could.
Best practices versus statute.
Yeah.
And it's up to the brokers, and part of it comes from this group. It's up to the brokers to agree on those best practices and create some way that at the same time, to Bill Ross' concerns about the public being taken care of and so forth. But if we're not taken care of as brokers in the industry, major stockholders or major stakeholders, then the consumer's not gonna benefit.
Sadly, greed gets in the way of a lot of things.
Yeah.
Bill, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I was just kind of really, and it may be that I'm just not in that space, but is this, do you all find from a commission standpoint and also from the folks that are in the field that consumers are that they're getting bamboozled by brokers who are sort of working under different names? And is this really sort of becoming a more rampant problem? Is it sort of something that's a one-off deal, or is this something that's really starting to happen? I don't see it, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening in the real world. I just, is the consumer sort of getting confused as to who they're dealing with? And I think that doesn't have to really go to the question of the information from brokerage services form. What we're probably trying to do from a regulatory standpoint is just make sure that a consumer has a go-to resource if they do have a complaint, if they do have a problem, if they do have a confusion, and to have somebody that they can go to so they can help sort it out. I think that for us to, so I'm asking, one question is this really a problem that's really pretty, starting to grow and ramp up? Do we have any complaints from the commission standpoint that's coming in? And then number two, doesn't the information brokerage services, form really sort of help identify the, you know, the consumer to go to, you know, resources so that they do have a problem, they can at least start their investigative process.
You wanna talk to that?
The first point.
Yeah.
We see all kinds of advertising things. I mean, I can't say for sure this is a rampant situation, but I mean, we don't get very many advertising complaints filed with us. So I can't say that but with good certainty. So.
Which, for the record, Leslie, the stuff that you sent over with the unprotected name, 100% an advertising violation because she refers to herself as CEO.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Yeah. So.
So on the broker associate thing, I mean, I know we did couple things with the motions. But one of the things that I got out of this, and part of it, Mike, is you clarified for me how much Trek, when they get a complaint from involving a broker associate, if I understand what you're saying is you stop right there. So it was not always my understanding. You know, I've got quite a few broker associates in my two offices. And I have, certainly from a complaint standpoint, Trek, a lawsuit, total different conversation, you understand that. But with Trek thing, I've never let them think that they were only responsible if something happened. And it was then I always say, you know what? If you get that Trek complaint, it's gonna come to me, it's gonna come to us. That's what I always have believed, but what I'm hearing now is no. When I've got a broker and none of my broker associates can sponsor people, so I don't have that problem, but if they do something wrong, what I'm hearing is when that Trek complaint hits them, I won't even know about it.
Correct. We're not required.
I mean, they'll tell me. So I say, what do I do now? And I say, okay, fine.
That was one of our recommendations.
Yeah.
The commission was to
Be notified.
get that notification.
So I think hopefully that'll be received, you know, welcomely. So they'll do that because you would want to know about it because, you know, we have in our E&O a service that allows for the E&O to help us in regulatory complaints. And so it may be that that's something that we would need access for a particular complaint, but we didn't know about it. So I think it'll help a lot, but I didn't realize that agree to which Trek was really firm on that. That person has a broker's license and that's all that counts. And I just, I find that I'm not gonna let my agents know that, but.
Well, I mean, to go back to what Vanessa was saying, we do join them in, but you have to do something independently that will have us avail yourselves to the situation.
But if there's not something in the complaint that specifically would identify me, just my broker associate, you wouldn't even know to join me, which.
Well, we would ask because.
Or you'd ask yeah.
They may put in, we'll see maybe your business entity name in the contract.
Yeah.
So the question may be asked. Ultimately, though, we would look and see what your involvement of it is, and we would have to make separate independent proof that, you know, you did something that is a violation of the License Act. Because there's not that link like it is in the License Act where a broker is responsible for the actions of their sales agents.
Makes sense.
There's no correlation
Yeah.
for associated broker and brokerage.
So very few of my broker associates are operating under an entity. They're just operating individually as a broker. Which means, of course, they get commissions as a broker, but they don't have a business entity. I think less than 20% of them have a business entity. So I've got a number of salespersons who have business entities, but not many broker associates.
The answer is the same regardless of whether they have an entity or not.
Yeah,
Right.
oh yeah, it's gonna stop with them, basically.
I heard Mike say we're not required to supply that, and I understand that we're not required. Does that mean we can't?
I think that's the question. It is a very good one. Like, does that mean we're prohibited from it? Like, do we have the authority? Is that?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the motion that you just made of, you know, because we don't statutorily have that relationship documented, you know, we don't document that relationship, where as staff can we investigate, you know, options to look into that.
Yeah. Because there could also be multiple you know, who are you notifying? So I think we've got to work through those concepts, but we can, I mean, we can look at all that.
Okay,
Did I answer that question?
I believe it is. Any further discussion on that? On the topic in general? Moving forward. Agenda item number 8 is the discussion and possible action regarding supervision.
Okay,
Of teams
before we
and-
go to 8,
Yes, sir.
I thought maybe in 7, we were gonna talk about the difference between a broker and a sponsoring broker.
We certainly can.
Is that kind of the agenda item that might cause that discussion?
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I mean, I will keep you, if it starts to go too far off what it looks like.
Okay,
But I think I think this is what Chance was saying earlier, we had an item last time that specifically addressed the distinction, and out of that came that broker responsibility recommendation. And in playing back, I think neither one of us could identify like a true agenda, like a specific agenda item, and I think, I don't even speak for you, Chance, but I think the idea was to try and get something or some things that are more specific for the next meeting, so that we can properly notice everything, and so I'll, you know, if we get real far out, then I'll bring it back.
so we did pass the motion that in order to obtain a broker's license, you had to take the broker responsibility course.
So that recommendation was
We
made.
did make that recommendation at the commission meeting.
Okay, which is a good step forward.
Agreed.
So the concept that is significant with me is the enormous difference between someone who is a sponsoring broker and someone who's just a broker. And I'm not minimizing being a broker. I think that's an important thing. That's a good thing. Somebody stepped up and they're at that level. But the difference for protection of the consumer, protection of the agents, for someone who's taking on the responsibility, they're gonna hire agents, they're gonna sponsor agents and whatever like that. It's a whole different level of responsibility. And I'm kind of coming at this from, at the very beginning, like what, 10, 12 years ago, first broker responsibility group, which it was the initiative for creating the broker responsibility course, as I recall. And it all came from, and this was kind of the beginning. I was in the broker lawyer at that time, so I wasn't paying a lot of attention to this, but this came from as I saw the evolvement of Trek. And part of this comes from the leadership we've got now, part of it comes from Scott, our chair. We're probably in the best position we've been in many, many years, and I've been involved in many, many years. As much as I respected Carrie Lewis, Loretta DeHay before her, Douglas O. Mixon, we've got a different animal today. Much more inclusive, much more open, much more receptive to our conversations. We've evolved dramatically. From the point that when I first became aware of Trek, some 30 years ago, there was nothing. That was just who issued your license and you renewed it, and who are they? Oh, there's this group down in Austin. Get his Berber stamp away. Okay, fine. Certainly didn't affect me. We were out selling houses. I could care less about it. As long as they don't get in the way of that, no big deal. But Trek evolved. And I saw part of their involvement when Trek created the Broker Lawyer Committee because of the battle between the realtors and the attorneys in Texas. Say, hey, we can't let those brokers be writing those contracts like they did in New Mexico, for example. And so it was interesting when the legislature said, okay, we're going to have this committee that's going to draw up the contracts. They're going to be promulgated forms. And the attorneys who were battling us said, okay, but it's got to be mandatory. It has to be mandatory that brokers have to use it. It was interesting at the time, and I don't remember the executive director at the time, but the word that came down to us, we were in the middle of, this was a bloody battle. I remember that. Trek said, wow, do we have the authority to do that? And the attorney said, you issue their license. Yeah, you can make them do this. And in my perspective, that was the beginning of Trek really gaining the strength and evolving to really understanding their authority, what they could do. This was, I guess, 30 years ago when I started really doing this. I think we've gotten to the point now with how we've evolved as broker responsibility, that we can take that next step, because when Track began to say, okay, with the responsibility course, how can we make brokers responsible? Because Track said, well, look at all these licenses out there. How in the world can we regulate all these licenses? Somebody said, well, in Texas, we got brokers. And every agent has a sponsoring broker. So we'll just go through the broker. We'll say, you're responsible. And then somebody said, well, if we're gonna hold brokers responsible, should we tell them what that means? Should we train them? Well, broker responsibility course came up. And that has evolved. The night and day difference from that first course, which I helped teach, to this one, I mean, it's huge. I mean, the one we've got now that I've gone through, and I guess it's incredible. But we now have got to the point now where we're saying, okay, brokers, you really are responsible, but here's who you are in the situation. And I think we need to be talking to that sponsoring broker differently than that broker who it's just that broker, so it's just that person. And I'd like for us to at least go through the concept of agreeing that this is important enough that in some way, shape, or form, we're gonna get past the obstacles, governor's office, legislature, all those other kind of things, to see if there's some way to do that. But I will own up to right now, this is a personal thing with me. I think it's important for the public, it's important for the license holders. And I'm a member of this group, and I'm a respectful member of this group. And I'm totally open to, wow, that's a good idea, but we got other things to deal with, and let's move on. If that's the feeling of the group, I'm okay with that. But I'd like for us to be able to tackle this, because it's gonna take time. I mean, it's gonna take a lot of time, because it deals with several things, including the legislature, governor's office, rules, all those kinds of things. But I think that in Texas, if you're a sponsoring broker, you're a different animal than you are if you're a broker. I think we need to have some mechanism that says if you're gonna be a sponsoring broker, you've gotta be doing these things. I don't think it's the mentor thing. I think it's something else. I don't know what it is. But I think with all the, smarts we've got in this room, I think hopefully we can come up with it if we agree that that's something we should do. And so I guess my request of all of you is say, okay, this is worth spending some time on, Bob. It's going to take several sessions to do it, but yeah, let's work on it. Let's put it on the agenda and let's keep it going. And we say no, then I'm okay with that too.
I just want to make sure I know exactly what you're referring to. Is it, do you want a different license type for sponsoring?
No, I don't. Now, I don't want to eliminate that, because I know that's a whole different set of rules. I think that's a group, there's a group that you're more aware of than I would, well, maybe not, but there's a group in the legislature that wouldn't allow that. It just wouldn't happen. And that they would see that as a barrier to entry. So I don't know that another license is even feasible. But if we came up with the idea and says, we've looked at all the ideas and another license is the most, I think some other way of doing it. It says if you're gonna be a sponsoring broker, not a different license, but there have to be some requirements that you have to go through.
Okay.
And so
I just wanted to know kind of
no,
what our.
that's kind of where I think I am. But
It seems Trek has created mechanisms for that in other scenarios. In order to get your broker's license, Trek requires experience and education. And so I think that's probably the track.
And that's a good start.
Yeah.
Good start. But, and I've got an agent in my office who's going through the process to get a broker's license. And she's been in the business for 6 years. She's basically a good agent, but she's met the minimum experience requirement. She's a smart girl. She's taken education. She'll pass the broker exam. But my gosh, heaven help us if she becomes a sponsoring broker, because she's pretty clueless. And going through those things is valuable. That's important. I just think somehow we need to come up with something that's maybe more than that. As hard as we work to expand those requirements, I think, and I know it's an uphill battle, but I think our requirements just need to be more, but some distinction about if you're gonna be a sponsoring broker, you need to have done more than what you did to become a broker. And I think the broker responsibility course is good. Maybe there's another course that can be created that's, for lack of a better word, is a sponsoring broker course that if you're gonna be a sponsoring broker, before you become a sponsoring broker, you have to take this course. Maybe it's something as simple as that, I don't know.
But the broker, the current, the new broker course, broker responsibility, like that's what it covers.
Well, it kind of does, and it's much better, even as good as the last one was, it's much better. You guys have done a good job of addressing literally the responsibilities. It's a much better thing. And so we've made some great progress there, and I would agree with that.
Chairman Kestner.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm on the same page as Bob. Anybody sitting for the broker's test has to take brokerage. If you sponsor, you have to take broker responsibility. You want something beyond that, or broker responsibility prior to sponsoring?
Okay, Chairman Kestner, our motion was not that you have to take the course if you're gonna be a sponsoring broker. You have to take the course if you're gonna be a broker. So if you're gonna sit for exam and you're gonna actually become a broker, then you have to take that course. It's not, you can become a broker and then the next day become a sponsoring broker, and you've taken that course, but you had to take it because if it gets passed in February, then you have to. So it's not necessarily a course that's required to be a sponsoring broker just to obtain a broker's license, if I recall the motion.
Correct. The motion was prior to sitting for the exam, you would take broker responsibility.
That's right. Because because if you're gonna renew your broker's license or sponsor, you still have to take it.
Right. So we didn't want people waiting 2 years.
Right.
So this would be so to answer Scott's question, this would be in addition to that if you're gonna sponsor.
Yes.
And just so I understand, this is, you wouldn't physically be allowed to go into, like, for example, right now, my license online services and send an invitation to sponsorship until you had met these.
Yeah, this would be a TREC requirement. This would be some level of rules or whatever your procedures are. And TREC would have to be able to determine, okay, this person is going to sponsor someone. Well, before they can do that, they've got to have met this requirement, whatever that might be.
Okay. Mr. Roth?
I really appreciate Bob's comments, and I'm struggling with the same issue, but where I'm conflicted is that it seems to me that there shouldn't be two classes of brokers. In other words, the quality of our brokerage license and our education should satisfy the requirement for whether we want to sponsor or not sponsor. In other words, we shouldn't have a lower level class or a class of brokers that because somebody has somebody sponsored by them, that they are required to have more education or whatever the responsibility, or if they don't want to, they have to have less. In other words, a broker should have all the skills, all the education, all the requirements to operate, whether they want to do it by themselves or they want to do it with associates. So I think the direction that we should be taking sort of, generally is let's try to get the best education and direction and resources available to a broker generally, so that they can operate in both of those scenarios, respectively. They don't have to have a separate deal, and that's where I sense that there's a perception that a person who's sponsoring somebody has to have a different level of skills than a person who's not sponsoring somebody. I feel like a person who's got the broker's license should have the ability to do that. And I think that's what I think the process of doing the broker responsibility course, increasing, looking at the mentoring situation, looking at our opportunities to have education and co-ops with other organizations stuff. I think that all builds on the quality of the broker license opportunity. It also improves the quality of our service and our responsibility to to the brokerage community as well as to the general community. So again, I feel for you, Bob, and I don't know what the answer is, but I'm sort of looking at it at a little bit different perspective.
Chance, on the same line of thinking, and this probably isn't for this meeting, but like a delegated supervisor, they can get first time agent, get their license today, and tomorrow
Sure.
there's a delegated supervisor, which could honestly not protect the consumer. So that's another thing we need to think about as well.
Go for it. I think we underutilize the delegated supervisor position. I know in earlier conversations in these meetings, we were advised that there's really no teeth in that position. If you're a delegated supervisor, so what? Although in our broker license points deal, we did the opportunity to earn points if you are a delegated supervisor, but we don't require it if you're going to become a sponsoring broker. So I don't know if that's an underutilized tool.
There are lots of brokers out there who make everybody a delegated supervisor because it requires them to have broker responsibility. So, Jen?
Yeah, if I can take us back just a little bit to Bob and Bill and your comments, I just wanted to remind everybody that, the ESAC recently revised the real estate brokerage course to really hone in on the expectations and the responsibilities that the broker has to those that they sponsor, as well as the expectations that the sponsoree should be able to expect from their sponsor. So I just wanted to acknowledge, one, that's the impact of that change we have not yet seen yet, because it's, it'll be, I believe it's up for adoption at the February meeting. There will be a time frame in which we allow providers to revise the course. So I just want to say that that's a force in action that's happening. And then also just reiterate the changes to the new broker responsibility 6-hour course, the renewal course, or now perhaps for introductory broker license, to also hone in on those aspects and really hone in on what the broker should be teaching, making sure that the sponsoree understands. And then, so anyway, I just wanted to make sure that you all had that information in your back pocket as you're talking about additional changes or recommendations.
So I want to say I agree with Bill. I think part of the first couple of meetings on exploring and diving into the requirements to get a broker's license was for this. Like we changed so much of the requirements to become a broker, or like putting more emphasis on experience for that reason. And I think it also goes against the government mandate of the letter, like we're making it more difficult if we're having 2 levels. We're kind of going against, what the mandate is.
Right.
And I mean, it's just, I do agree that there could be a little more help for people, but maybe it's just classes that are not mandatory per se, as in we already have one, but like best practices on how to, kind of like the white paper idea that Chance had earlier, but more of best practices on how to run a brokerage with agents under you, but it's an elective. I mean, if we're brokers, we're already at the higher level. We should want to take those classes, not necessarily, and I know there's all kinds of different people, but some people don't care, but I think we should all be held into that higher standard. That's just my 2 cents.
So then, if we're looking at an agenda item for next time, right, because this starts to get us into a little bit of a different area, what do we think the more concrete, like what is the topic? Because we wanna have an agenda that tells the public what we're talking about, right?
So regular brokers versus non-sponsoring brokers versus sponsoring brokers.
Like
That's
you
the
said in the
discussion.
form of a question, should sponsoring brokers have a higher requirement, education or otherwise, than other brokers?
Than non-sponsoring brokers.
Yeah.
Is that it?
That's the discussion.
I think that's what you're,
Okay, so yeah, that's the basic concept, and I understand both of you are saying about broker, we should work hard on making sure if you're gonna be a broker, that's a very high level, which we have spent a lot of time on with the application and switching around the requirements. Remind me what the experience requirement is to sit for the exam and become a broker? Somebody remind me of that? For the last
No,
5
the
years,
training.
what is it?
For the last 5 years. and
For the last-
360 points.
How much?
You were on the right track. 4 of the last 5 years and 360 points.
And how do you get
Remember the
360 points? Anybody remember?
Through activity, sales activity.
How much sales activity? 2 a year. You get 2 sales a year for the last 4 of the last 5 years, you get 360 points.
I think it's 4 a year.
Well, we changed to
Okay,
get that
four.
last
It's
year.
4 a year.
So 4.
Yeah. it's better.
So, and it was before, and we made a lot of progress there.
Right.
From a practical, and I agree that this would be a good action item, and that's a good question. But from a personal experience standpoint, up in our market, it probably happens way more than it should. When I've got an agent call and say, I got a problem, and I say, okay, so who's the agent on the other side? Well, the agent is the broker. And the agent is a broker maybe by themselves or a small company, and they're clueless. They don't have any idea what they're doing.
That does happen a lot.
And
80% of the calls I get.
you know, it's just. Now, we can't fix all those problems, but while I agree that if you're gonna have a broker's license, you ought to be at a higher level. I mean, it's really, but I don't think we'll ever be able to fully achieve that because of what's in the letter about obstacles and so forth. I mean, to me, it's amazing we made as much progress as we did to be able to create it. And I absolutely agree, experience more important than education, although, you know, both are important. But, you know, it's just, you can be a part-time agent for the last 5 years, 2, 4, 5 deals a year, and go out and be a broker, and and sponsor 100 people. You have no idea what you're doing. I don't know that we'll ever totally fix that, but it's a problem in the industry. It's a problem in my area, you know, and I see, kind of, you know, is that a problem in Lubbock? But it is, it's a challenge.
Yes, it is. I'm agreeing with you, Bob, it is, because a lot of them just, I mean, I have instances where the people just held their license for 2 years and took the test before we changed everything. And then that's the biggest complaint we get. Is like, they won't answer me, and who's the broker? They are the broker, so what do I do next? I mean, I get those calls 4 or 5 times a day. So I'm right with you.
Chairman Kestner.
I like the idea for your next meeting. Just make sure Jennifer gets that new brokerage course book to everybody. That way y'all will have that information to kind of dissect when y'all do come up with something, because I know there's been some really good changes in that. I guess if the commission adopts it in February, right? But I think that'd be good information for y'all to have.
I don't know if y'all noticed the big bucket of foreshadowing there, but.
Oh,
Pam, did you have something else you wanted to throw on there? No, okay. Is everybody okay with that discussion item in the next?
Yeah, I just want to keep it on the table until we finally
For
fix
sure.
it one way or the other. You say, Bob, that's it, as far as we're gonna go, move on.
So I think if I
Whatever, I
can,
just want to get it, but keep it on the table until we get it something done.
I think if I can throw a challenge out to the group, is that prior to our next meeting, if you imagined this going a certain direction, what would that look like if it was if it was the Chance Brown Real Estate Commission, this is what it would look like. Or if it was the Bob Baker Real Estate Commission, this is what it would look like. And let's just bring all that to the table
Yeah,
and you know, see what
Yeah.
happens.
Good,
makes sense.
Very good.
I like it.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank all of you for listening to my little tirade here.
No,
Actually, I
It's a real
really
problem.
appreciated the history.
Yeah, that was
Me too.
That's
awesome.
great.
Thank you.
me too.
It was a fun history to live through,
All right,
especially
so-
considering where we've ended up. It's great.
So now we have discussion and possible action regarding supervision of teams and real estate brokerages.
This one needs a lot of help.
Okay,
Can we go back to your point 1 on your slide? And that is to protect. It's the mission of the commission, and to promote the, real estate opportunity as well. And so I think there's lack of supervision of the agents because of the concept of groups and teams and large brokerages. And just recently looking at a brokerage on the Trek website where there's literally hundreds of groups and teams sponsored by a single broker. And it begs the question, who's supervising? And I think that's the conversation we might have around where do you put in a layer of supervision, and can Trek create rules to mandate supervision of teams or groups or locations or something like that, that truly achieves the mission of protecting the consumer from unsupervised agents.
This also goes back to the delegated supervisor thing, because you have to have a delegated supervisor, and that supervisor could have just come on board yesterday.
Does a group or a team require a delegated supervisor?
But you don't have to be a broker.
That's the thing.
But you have to be a broker?
I would like to see a broker. No, you do not.
That's what she's saying. I could get my license today and tomorrow become a supervisor.
But so I don't necessarily agree with that. So for example, in our mentoring and training program, I have a number of mentors who are not brokers, but we delegate them as supervisors because they're overseeing the activities of the mentees under them.
That's exactly what I do.
Right, no, I'm just discussing for teams. I mean, and I think a lot of states do it, that you have to be a broker to have a team or associated broker.
But right now, we don't require that.
No.
And I think this came out of the 5.2 when we had that thing about here, supervise somebody more than 3 months, or expect to, for something that's real estate activity, and you have to be designated as supervisor, so the broker has to send that into Trek. And I seem to recall when we went through that and dealt with that, on one level, a big reason we did that is because that person is now going to go to the broker responsibility course. We're going to help them understand, kind of, here's what it means, you're supervising these people, real estate activity, and you've got a different level of responsibility, and here's what it is. The challenge that we kind of worked through it, and I may have brought this up, we've got a challenge with these teams, and we've got teams out there that you have to look really hard to figure out who they're even with. Because we've moved in the industry from focus on the broker to focus on the agent, which was a good move, I think. But you still have to make sure we know who that agent's with, who that team is with. But you've got some huge teams out there that, I mean, they're like their own brokerage.
Yes.
But they're not.
Oh, sure.
And so I think in the whole team kind of thing, it was one good step to say, okay, if you've got a team, and I think every lead agent for a team has to be held responsible for supervising that team. I think Trek views that, if I'm understanding it correctly. And so that person has to be named as a delegated supervisor, and it shows up on that little checkbox on the Trek website and so forth, or should anyway. Half the time it doesn't, but that's how that is. So as we work through that, good step forward, but now we've got to make sure somehow we deal with this whole issue of brokers not understanding how responsible the broker is, the activities of those teams. And part of that is to make sure the broker reviews and approves the team contracts. Because those teams are going to have a contract on that team, you know, with all their team members, and have to approve them. And as we look at our, sometimes they've got some stuff in there, say, well, you know what? That doesn't look like a bunch of independent contractors. That looks like some employees. The restrictions you've got, you can't do that, and we got to move. So somehow we've got to get that broker on board with understanding the responsibility the broker has on how those teams operate within their brokerage, because it still is something that's happening within their brokerage.
And Bob, actually, you bring up a lot of good points here too, but has anybody ever tried to find a supervisor of a team? Have you ever tried to like look them up on Trek?
No, and that's what a problem
And,
is
and
too,
you
'cause on our.
can't, even if they're designated, you know, if they're the supervisor, how do you know what team they're the supervisor of? Without contacting the broker first and saying, hey, James, who's the supervisor of this?
On Trek's website, no, but on IABS, it should be filled out.
Right, but let's just say you don't have IABS.
Right.
I think it's a problem
I
too.
think ultimately
I
it
think it's
goes
an
back
issue.
to the conversation we had earlier, which is, I'm gonna hit a
Association.
stop at a broker.
Mm-hmm.
When a complaint comes in, the agent and the sponsoring broker, which does not include the team leader.
Right,
But Chance, the problem is too, is people write contracts or they do all the work and all of a sudden the team leader's name is on the contract and they haven't even touched the thing.
how about this?
So that's, to me, it's very confusing.
How about this? How about somebody else? No, I know there's a brokerage in my area, I'm not gonna name names or anything. But all of that person's associates write their contracts underneath that person's
what I'm
name,
saying.
Sure.
right?
Right.
And now, obviously, they're responsible for everything if anything goes wrong or whatever, right? But still,
Right.
the consumer's like, oh, well, Janie's been helping me. Well, Janie's nowhere on this contract.
That's exactly what I was.
And the problem is they're acting as kind of a transaction coordinator almost, but they're not. They're actually the agent, and they're writing it in somebody else's name, and it's very convoluted.
Can I
And I see this-
Back to, you know.
Exactly.
Could I
We see a lot
flip, could I
of it.
flip the coin on that?
Yeah,
So on the other side of that coin is, if I'm a team leader and you're one of my agents, and you're doing all the work, but you're writing the contract in my name, seemingly that would put the impetus on me to make sure you're
it's
doing
right.
the job right.
That's what I would think too.
Which is the same as a
But
broker.
isn't it confusing, like if I, go back and look at a contract, and I'm like, wow, that's not who I even negotiated this with. Because there's not even a line on that page to show who that other agent is, it's just the team leader that I've never even talked to.
Well, what would
There is
happen?
actually on page 10.
Well,
There's a delegated supervisor line, and if that person is if that team leader is a delegated supervisor, which they're supposed to be, that should go
Maybe-
there.
But sometimes
And
they
then
put
the
delegated.
agent, the selling associate should go on the line below,
But don't they put the delegated supervisor of that office a lot of times?
more often, in practice, yes.
Right.
Yeah, and that's just education,
Yeah.
more than anything, on how to fill out the contract,
But
right?
what happens if Mike receives a complaint from a consumer? And he says, hey, look, this is a real issue here, you know, Janie didn't represent me well when selling my house. Mike's like, okay, he's seen all the documents, well, Janie's nowhere to be seen on this contract, anywhere. How does that work exactly?
Goes to the broker.
It goes to the broker and then
Well, if someone.
So Janie did all the work.
Janie did all the
What are
work,
you saying?
If Janie did all the work, but Leslie's name is on the contract,
right?
because she's the team leader.
Y'all joined in some sort of sense. Team lead, the team supervisor isn't necessarily joined in automatically.
Even though their name, even if she's the team lead and her name's the only one on the contract.
Who would
It's gonna
ask why?
Yeah,
Okay, but it's gonna be the agent that the
Well,
complaint's
we
filed
look at the
against.
substance of the
What if-
complaint. If it's like, I have an issue, I'm alleging this against this specific person,
uh-huh,
obviously we're gonna open that private web jurisdiction, find who their broker is, and all that.
and
things.
dig.
And then find out, oh, maybe this person should be added because they were somehow involved in the transaction, one thing or another.
Does that seem like an issue to
But
you?
they're
though?
not like automatically liable like the broker.
Right.
I mean,
I see what
Is
you
that
mean.
something you deal with a lot, or no?
not necessarily, no.
Think about it this way too, going back to what we're talking about. So your associated broker is the team lead for this, but the rest of the people are under main broker. So it's all, I mean, it gets convoluted again.
It's bad for the consumer, but I think for Trek, it doesn't matter because it goes to the broker,
Right,
regardless of whose name's on the
Who
contract.
is ultimately responsible for the actions of
Right.
team leaders and team members
So
alike?
the
But we do have
associate,
to-
Whether
so
they're
the
associated or
associated
not.
broker that's the team lead, whose name is now on the contract, versus the agent who really worked that.
Boy, it doesn't, this is bad for the consumer.
Yeah.
It's really bad for the consumer.
It's all very confusing.
So what,
I don't know the
what part
action
is
to
bad
take
for the
on that.
consumer?
If there's an issue, they better know who to go to, or they, I guess they don't know who's really representing them.
the contract's under somebody else's name and they're dealing with somebody else on the transaction. Again, it just goes back to the confusion, I think, for consumers.
And that delegated supervisor associated broker is not even really sponsored by the main person that's sponsoring the agents that really worked on these.
Bill?
Yeah, there's a disconnection.
I just looked at the, maybe I'm missing something, but if the first line is who's the licensed broker and who's who's the brokerage firm, that's, if there's a problem with somebody and somebody needs to know who they're dealing with, who's the operative party from a consumer standpoint especially, that would be the first place they go to, is that's the designated first stop on the journey. And that person is really the one who needs to be supervising and being responsible for and managing all of their either individual agents or their individual or the teams that are part of their organization or their associated brokers or whoever it is. It would seem to me that, and again, and maybe I'm just not in that space and my world is a little different, but gosh, it seems to me that the person who really needs to have the responsibility is that head broker, that designated broker for the company and that person. And it's up to him to manage his business, whether it's managing an agent, teams, or organizing and creating policies and requirements on how, communication occurs. It doesn't seem to me that that's a regulatory issue. It seems like that's a business practice issue. And that we need to educate people on how to manage their businesses. To manage it, if I'm the head guy of my company and I've got 10 different types of agents, I've got single agents, I've got guys who have their own teams, I have people who are associated brokers, the burden's on me to manage those folks. It's not up to, to Trek to manage it or to other people to manage it. My name is on the sign. My name is on the door. My name is on the commitment for the license. And I should be the guy that everybody's calling if there's a problem in my organization or associated with my organization. And I think the IABS sort of helps the world identify that the guy at the top of the pyramid is that name that's on that first line, unless I misunderstand how that stuff works, or maybe it's not enough.
I don't disagree. Pam?
I mean, I agree with Bill, but then there are cases where we have rented brokers and the supervisor or the person that's representing the company is not the broker. Did you really have to do some digging to actually find the broker? So you don't always get the broker, you get the supervisor who's not usually doesn't even have a broker's license. So I think that's kind of a problem too, so.
I don't know what we do with this, guys. I tend to agree that this is a business practice, not a regulatory thing.
I've also noticed in other states, this is kind of off that, but other teams can't have, or a person can't have multiple team names. People can only register one team name. Also, the team names can only be used once. So if you have Jennifer Smith at this place and Jennifer Smith team at this place, whoever registered it first, the other person can't have it. So it takes some of the confusion out.
Okay, so wait a minute. So if I was a broker, I send a team name in for one of my agents, they can only use one team name?
Mm-hmm. Meaning you're like one team.
Within my brokerage,
Correct.
this individual agent who's sponsored by me, and they say, here's my team name, and so I send that into Trek. Are you saying there are not any other team names that agent can create that I can send into Trek?
Right, like you can't have Jennifer Smith team or and then JS team or whatever, the same person having multiple team names.
I disagree.
Is that Is that in the statute somewhere? Have I
No, no,
missed
no.
that?
No, I'm
No,
just
that's
saying
not-
other states
No, no,
have
no.
a
Okay,
limited.
but
Limit
our
the amount of
agents can
teammates.
have multiple
Yes.
teammates, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay. You had me worried here for a minute.
Yeah, you're like, uh-oh.
Because I have a couple who have different teams.
What is the purpose of having multiple teammates?
Well, one of them is their traditional residential, and one of them, they only serve builders.
Hmm.
And so it's a different team name for the builder side than it is their regular residential business.
It's a marketing thing.
Yeah, it's just all.
Yeah.
And right now, we can have Jennifer Smith team at CBNE and Jennifer Smith team at El Paso, right?
Yes. I don't know how you.
Well, that says a broker associate.
Pardon?
That says a broker
That
associate.
just as a team name.
Team
Just
name.
team name.
Yeah, I've just noticed, because there's been a lot of emails going back and forth
Like,
about
there's
team
probably-
names, and that was one thing.
If I had to
saw.
guess, there's probably 500 hometown realtor teams.
Yeah.
You know, that
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of thing.
Oh,
right?
yeah, okay, yeah.
Which is also a violation of the NAR trademark, but whatever. There's still probably about 500 of them.
Who cares?
You know.
Did I say that out loud?
Yeah.
We're gonna manage
There
it.
is a lot of confusion, just in general.
Yeah.
Not good.
All right. Are we good there? Do we need to do anything with that?
I don't know, what did we do?
I mean, we just talked. I don't know that there's anything to do because I genuinely believe that that's just a business practice issue.
Yeah.
Not something we need to regulate. All right, that brings us to next meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, April 12th, 2023 at 10 a.m., same bat time, same bat channel. Everybody good with that date? Going once, going twice. Hey, before we adjourn, I'm gonna just make a suggestion, and I know that it's not a Trek item, but as of yesterday afternoon, most of you are aware, the Texas legislature is in session. Generally speaking, there are somewhere around 4,000 bills out of the 7,500 to 8,000 that will get filed that in some way, shape, or form affect our business, right? And the Texas Realtors do a great job of following those. And if you are a member of the trade association, I highly recommend that you go into your communication preferences and turn on the legislative liaison, because you will see things in there that might be things that we need to bring to this group and talk about. And that's
things that will
that's
scare
a
you.
newsletter that will publish every Friday during session. So I highly recommend you take a look at that. And if there's anything you see on there, bring it back to us.
Do we want to do this will help me is why I'm asking. Do we want to do a very quick run through of what we have for future agenda items?
We certainly can.
I would love that. And now we can expect, I mean, contingent upon what happens at February meeting, we can expect to have some, rule review in terms of the transactions and the,
Supervision of
response
transactions,
time, yeah,
response
so
time.
we'll see that. But I know we had an item on, the requirements for sponsoring broker.
So we had a question that we wanted to move forward to the
Right,
next,
should there be a difference between a sponsoring broker and a
non-sponsored broker.
non-sponsoring broker?
Be a required, like a,
Whether that's education or experience or whatever.
okay. Anything with teams? Nope. Okay,
That was really it.
that's really it for now, unless things come up. Okay, that is helpful to me, because I will look at this, that way we don't, happen further down the road, and then it's like, I cannot remember.
Okay, so on the thing that Jennifer is going to get us copies of, what is that?
I'm going to provide you, well,
Assuming
Amber.
adoption.
a copy of the course approval form with all the topics and subtopics that have been modified in the new real estate brokerage course that is up for adoption in February.
Just to verify, it will get for proposal.
Oh, it's up for proposal.
So, assuming,
Sorry about
So
that.
will that, depending on what happens in February, will that be an agenda item?
it'll be part of the agenda item on the education, on what you're talking about,
Okay.
sponsoring versus non-sponsoring.
Okay,
Because it will show, hey,
okay, good.
all brokers are getting this amount of education now versus what they were getting before.
So that'll help us with that discussion. Sure.
Materials, yeah.
Okay,
Very good. On that note, this meeting is adjourned. We will see you in April. Thank you
Good
very
job.
much.
Thanks, sir.
1:59.
Can I pass you something?
Bye, everybody virtually, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
I see that. I get to hear your wife having a
Sure.
broker. So